Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, yo, I'm Jovan Buha, NBA reporter and analyst for Buha's Block, and welcome to another live show. On today's episode, we are going to be discussing the Lakers' current depth chart, looking at a snapshot of where LA's roster currently stands and how I believe the starting lineup will shake out, the rotation will shake out, the closing lineup, and also looking at different variations of the starting lineup, thanks to a cool tool over at B-Ball Index, where you can build out a lineup and it will tell you the projection of what that lineup will look like. So it's an awesome feature over there, and we'll be playing with that to look at different variations of who the Lakers' fifth starter should be from a statistical projection perspective. But shout out to the chat, shout out to the late night gang. Appreciate you all. Shout out to everybody. All right, let's get into it. So I'm going to start with the offensive depth chart, and I want to start with that just because that's typically how we discuss lineups and the construction of lineups, right? With Luka at point guard and taking a quick view at that. Then I want to quickly pivot over to the defensive depth chart, and I think that's a bit more important in how I am more so viewing the roster and who should start versus who should be in the rotation, who should come off the bench, etc. And I want to apply a giant caveat here to this entire discussion because, as we know, the Lakers are still in the hunt for Jonathan Kuminga and or potentially another starting level wing or forward. So if the Lakers add Jonathan Kuminga or if they add another player, that will obviously change how we view this entire exercise, especially the starting group. I think Kuminga would immediately slot in as a starter, whether that's PJ Washington or a different player. They would immediately become a starter, move whoever is that starter into the second unit group, and then potentially move someone from that second unit into the third unit. And obviously then someone would have to be going out in that trade. So that would also change either the second group or the third group. So there's a lot to still be determined with the Lakers offseason, a lot still up in the air. And I think in potentially the next couple of days or the next week, next couple of weeks, we will have an update here whether the Lakers make a bigger move for a starting level wing / forward or a smaller move, maybe just getting off of a contract to open up a roster spot, either to have just 14 players or to add someone else with a vet minimum contract. Maybe a player gets squeezed by the market and is now all of a sudden available. Lakers like that player better than spots like 11 to 15 on their roster. They end up trading one of the guys at the back end, clearing a spot, and then signing that player for the minimum. I think that's a way that this all could play out. So I want to start with the offensive depth chart. Then we will quickly pivot over to the defensive depth chart. Offensively, if we're looking at this from an offensive perspective, Luka at point guard, Austin at shooting guard, Quentin Grimes is in the Marcus Smart role, which offensively was more of that three spot, less of that ball handler, secondary playmaker that is Austin when he's out there with Luka. And then Grimes is simply in a catch and shoot, attack from the secondary side type spot. Then Jake LaRavia at the 4, which I think will be the most polarizing and controversial selection here. Then Walker Kessler at the 5. So looking at this, I think there are 4 starting locks right now for the Lakers. It's Luka, Austin, Grimes, and Kessler. I think that 5th spot is open for multiple guys. And right now, I think if the Lakers are playing a game tonight or playing a game tomorrow and needed to put out a lineup, I do believe LaRavia would be the 5th guy out there. But there are several guys you can make a case for, right? Like a lot of people are penciling in Mamu. I will get into why I am lower on that fit with him as the starting 4 with this particular group. There will still be the people that say Jared Vanderbilt should start. I have my skepticism of that just because of JJ's relationship with Vando, how he views him, how he's used him. Maybe Adu Thero makes the leap and continues to progress. He ends up starting as well. Then you have Zaire Williams, a recent addition for the minimum, who I think might actually have the second best case to start behind Jake LaRavia. But wanted to lay this out from an offensive perspective because this is the way, again, I think we primarily talk about lineup construction, and people will be like, well, the Lakers backcourt is Luka and Austin, when in reality, I think the depth chart is a bit different when you look at it from a defensive perspective. And that's where we will now shift our attention and primarily focus on this. So this is how I view the Lakers depth chart from a defensive perspective, with the same starters, but rearranged with the same second and third units. So why do I have this alignment here? Well, from what we've heard about Quentin Grimes from the team, as well as Quentin Grimes' recent interview with ESPN LA, the Lakers really view Quentin Grimes as a point of attack defender, and he is going to be the primary backcourt guy. So right now I have him slotted defending point guards because most teams have an all-star level or high level starting point guard or lead ball handler. That is, I think, going to be the assignment for Quentin Grimes moving forward. So technically, he can defend either backcourt spot, but I have him as the primary guy against lead ball handlers, whether that's a true point guard or maybe a bit of a bigger player. Does get a little complicated when you think about a guy like a Cade Cunningham or someone of that size. I think those types of guys are a little bit too big for Quentin Grimes. But for now, I would say if it's a player who is a guard-sized player who is the primary backcourt guy, like a Jalen Brunson, a Tyrese Maxey, a player like that, a De'Aaron Fox, guys like that, those are the guys I think Quentin Grimes is going to defend. Then you will have, so that'll be point of attack. That is Quentin Grimes' defensive role. Then you have Austin Reeves, who will be in a chaser role, and his role will be guarding guys off of the ball more so, and the secondary guy in the backcourt. And I think Austin, that's one of his better skills defensively, is screen navigation and sticking with guys around floppy actions or pin downs or whatnot, whether it's on the baseline or the sideline. And that to me is a proper deployment of Austin. And this is where, going back to last season, why the starting group worked so well with Marcus Smart compared to Rui Hachimura was Marcus was able to defend 1 through 3, even 1 through 4 sometimes. And he could take on, if it was the best opposing player was a 1, Marcus would guard them. Best opposing player was a 2, Marcus would guard them. 3, Marcus would guard them, etc. So that is the task right now for Quentin Grimes and whether he could do that or not. But Austin will be the secondary backcourt guy. Now some teams have no place to hide, and it's just like they're going to test Austin. If you have 2 elite, if you're playing Philly again, that means he has to guard VJ Edgecombe, right? And that means Grimes is on Maxey, and there's just not really a great defensive matchup there, but that's the reality of the situation. Then I have Jake LaRavia here starting, and this is the primary reason why I have Jake LaRavia starting over Zaire Williams, over Vando, over Mamu, over Adu. We will get into it a little bit more in a second, but the primary reason is using Jake LaRavia as a wing stopper. I think JJ has shown that he believes in Jake far more than he believes in Vando. Last season, Jake started 43 of the 82 games. He started more than half the season. And when it was LeBron out or Austin out or Rui out or Marcus out, Jake was often the guy that JJ turned to start. So if you just go by JJ's actions last season, and even I would argue keeping Jake in the playoff rotation a little bit longer than many anticipated, it still gave him a couple chances in that Thunder series before eventually benching him. I think JJ has a proclivity for Jake and just his style of play, being that connector offensively, sometimes a good shooter. Obviously for the totality of the season was not a good shooter, shot 32% on threes, but solid defender, solid rebounder for his size, and plays hard and brings a level of toughness defensively that I think the Lakers want within the rotation. Now, I don't think this is set in stone, and clearly this is the spot in the rotation the Lakers should be looking to upgrade here. I think if Jonathan Kuminga were on this roster, Jonathan Kuminga would be in that Jake LaRavia spot, Jake would be in the Vando spot, and Vando would be somewhere in that third string alongside, maybe it depends who's being sent out in a Kuminga trade, but let's just say it's something like Hardy and Dalton for salary matching purposes. Vando would then probably be in that third string small forward spot or Adu, depending on how you want to classify either one of those guys. But then Jake, I think, would be in a more appropriate slotting backup role and Kuminga would be starting. But that small forward spot, I'm viewing as the wing stopper spot. And that is where you need a certain level of utility defensively. You also want a certain level of size and rebounding. And that's where, to me, Jake is kind of the Goldilocks option here, where like he's better offensively than Vando. And certainly there's a trust with JJ built in. I think for right now, he's better ahead of Adu, at least as a shooter, but overall offensively as a connecting player, though Adu has the upside to surpass him as well. Zaire is the one where I think it's closer. Zaire averaged more points per game last season than Jake. He shot better from three than Jake. I would say as constructed, Jake is better at guarding up. So if you are playing a true power forward, if you are playing a team with a double big look or a guy who likes to post up, I think Jake LaRavia is better equipped to defend that type of player than Zaire Williams. Jake is also a notably better rebounder than Zaire Williams. I think that's something you want with this group overall, is if you're not going to start another like true big, you have Kessler, who's a great defensive rebounder. You have Luka, who is a great defensive rebounding guard / wing. And then if you add in another strong rebounder in Jake for his specific position, I think you're in a pretty good spot with the defensive glass. So I think based on, and I haven't mentioned Mamu, with Mamu, I think the thing here, and I have some notes that I'll get into it in a second, is to me, it's pretty similar to the Rui situation, where I know a lot of people have been projecting this out as like Mamu is the Rui replacement, right? And I don't think it's a perfect analog. There are some similarities between the two. There are some major differences between the two. But between the two, Mamu is much more of a traditional big man than Rui is. Mamu has played most of his minutes and defended primarily fives throughout his career. So while people are projecting Mamu at the four, and he does have the versatility to play the four, Mamu has actually played more at the five and defended more at the five than at the four. So if we view Rui and Mamu from a positional standpoint, Rui was more of like either a true four, or with how the Lakers used him, kind of a 3.5, right? Like they'd often, if Rui was starting, he would be in that Jake role and he would be a bit miscast because he's not great at being that wing stopper or being that primary defensive guy for, I mean, we just saw that the limitations to it the last couple of years. But that would be like, that was the role the Lakers were asking of him. You can't ask that of Mamu. Mamu's slower than Rui. Mamu is way more of an interior defender and a helper than Rui. So while, I think Mamu's probably better overall defensively and rates out better defensively than Rui. In terms of being a wing stopper, I actually think Rui is better in that specific role than Mamu is. And if it's like, hey, go guard an athletic wing and try to get a stop, I think Rui is better equipped at Mamu than that. But even then, Rui was not equipped to really do that. And we saw how the Lakers Lakers defense and offense, honestly, they were better on both sides with that new starting group. But just how things clicked into place when they replaced Rui with a defensive point of attack / wing stopper in Marcus Smart. Now, the distinction here for me is Quentin Grimes, in my opinion, has yet to show he can scale up and consistently guard threes, and definitely has not shown he can consistently guard fours. So against backcourt guys, no issue with Quentin Grimes. Against big wings, an issue with Quentin Grimes. Now, maybe he continues to develop on the defensive side. He's still in his mid-20s. He still has upside, and the Lakers are making a big bet on him to the point where maybe he can guard threes consistently, and he is both the point of attack guy and the wing stopper. But I think there will be situations in which, for example, Grimes' old team, let's just play this out here, and this is before even factoring in the possibility of LeBron going there. If you have Maxey, Edgecombe, Jaylen Brown, Dean Wade, and Joel Embiid, all right, well, you're going to slot Walker Kessler on Joel Embiid. You're going to slot Quentin Grimes, I believe, on Tyrese Maxey. You're going to put Austin on VJ Edgecombe. Then who's guarding Jaylen Brown? It's either Luka or it's Mamu in that case, right? And I just think that does not make any sense whatsoever. You want both of those guys as the third front court guy or secondary forward guy, as a helper, as a roamer, leveraging defensive playmaking and help rotations. You do not want either one of those guys as like the primary defensive stopper. And I think really Luka's actually more equipped to do that than Mamu is. And so Luka would be put in this position where he has to be like the wing stopper, which to me just doesn't make any sense. So I think, to me, I do not, like, other than just a talent perspective, which I get, and a contract perspective, which Mamu's now getting paid more than double what Jake's making, more than Vando's making, more than Zaire Williams is making, more than Adu's making. Like, sometimes contracts and politics play a role in all this in terms of who starts versus who comes off the bench. But to me, Mamu, I think it makes much more sense as a third big and as both the backup 4 and backup 5, which I'll touch on in a second. And then it's to me, it's either Jake or Zaire Williams realistically. I think that the case is a bit weaker for Vando or Adu just because of their shooting limitations and their overall offensive limitations as things stand right now. So to me, I view this more as a Jake versus Zaire Williams conversation. And certainly there's a chance Zaire Williams is the better choice. Again, averaged more points, shot better from 3. Some of his defensive metrics are better than Jake's, especially in terms of his defensive playmaking with the steals. So I would say, again, with Jake's defensive utility in terms of being able to guard 4s and being a better rebounder, I do lean Jake a little bit more, especially if his shot regresses to where it was a couple of years ago. But I think, to me, this conversation is more between Jake and Zaire Williams than anyone else. Vando, I don't think, has the trust of the coaching staff. Adu is still coming along, and I think he's still relatively raw offensively, needs to develop his jumper. Mamu, to me, is just too defensively limited for what the Lakers need in that starting role. So to me, it's more of a wing conversation. And to me, it's between Jake and Zaire Williams. Here are some of my notes. First and foremost, the 5th starting spot is clearly the spot that needs the upgrade, whether it's a Kuminga, a PJ Washington, someone else. To me, Mamu shouldn't start for the same reasons Rui shouldn't start, of just, I think ideally you want like 2 high-level perimeter guys out there defensively, and the Lakers have one guy in Grimes, but then it's, to me, between Jake or Zaire, like who you view in that spot. Also worth mentioning, Cameron Carr. I think it depends. I guess it depends how comfortable you are with him guarding up. I do view Carr right now, with the lack of strength and overall weight, as someone who's probably better defending backcourt guys and not necessarily, like, I don't know if he's ready to defend 3s full time. Whereas I think if you put him out there with Grimes, he's a bit bigger than Grimes. He's taller than Grimes. He's longer than Grimes. And so you might want to put Carr in that position where he's guarding the big wings. And I think that's an over ask, especially for a rookie. So I do primarily view this as Jake versus Zaire. And I think based on Jake's reliability last season and the proof of concept with him, albeit better in a bench role, but like that's just the current state of the Lakers roster, I think they would lean Jake. Now with Mamu, if we go back for a second here, I needed to do this cleanly to have 3 guys in each spot just for aesthetic purposes to a degree. But I truly view this as Mamu's probably the 6th man in this case, and he is both the backup 4 and the backup 5. He's the Lamar Odom in this roster build. Colin Sexton is the 7th man. He's the backup guard to, if we really go back to the offensive depth chart, he's more that backup guard to Luka and Austin as the 3rd primary ball handler, but he's going to be primarily guarding guards as a point of attack guy. Then I would probably slot Cameron Carr as the 8th man and Zaire Williams as the 9th man, though there could be some competition and debate between those 2 spots. And if Jake LaRavia was coming off the bench, I'd probably view him more as the 8th guy, Carr as the 9th guy, just again, because of the familiarity, the continuity, the proof of concept with the coaching staff. But that to me is like the top 9. Then we get to the Vando Adu spots in the rotation. And I think it's going to be a real competition between those guys. But those guys I view more as like a distant 10th. And I think LA will lean on that top 9. So I wanted to make that clarification because while technically I have Mamu slotted as the primary backup 5 and getting almost all of the non-Kessler minutes, I also have him getting a ton of the 4 minutes and playing in double big lineups next to Walker Kessler, as well as potentially next to Kevon Looney in certain bench configurations. So I just wanted to state that again, if you look at Mamu's lineup data, he has played nearly 70 minutes 70% of his minutes at the 5. He's matched up with 5s nearly 70% of the time. So I know there's this notion that he's this 4 out there, but in talking to people out in Vegas, watching more film on him, I do think he looks more like a 5 on film than he does a 4. Now with a certain 5, which I think Kessler can be that 5, you can make it work in terms of a double big look. But I view Mamu almost as like the point forward center with the bench group more so than like a full-time power forward, the way I see some people talk about him. I just don't know if he has the puppies. I don't know if he has the speed and athleticism to play the full-time 4, because some teams go double big, and I think he could play in those. If you're playing OKC and they got Chet out there, all right, Mamu's probably fine. If you're playing, again, to bring back the Philly example, if Philly's going smaller and Jaylen Brown's actually at the 4, where are you putting Mamu? Like, you're in a pretty tough spot at that point. So I think based on the versatility and what the Lakers need from a wing stopper perspective and an overall perimeter defense perspective, I think Mamu makes far more sense as a bench player, and it's more of a Jake LaRavia, Zaire Williams conversation. And again, I think Zaire has a real shot to start over Jake, especially if he continues to develop offensively, develop as a shooter. And also if the Lakers are comfortable just using him solely on wings and using Luka as a 4, right? Because I think there would be scenarios in which if a team has a stronger 4 than a stronger 3, you just put Jake on that guy and you hide Luka on the 3. But if the Lakers are fine with, hey, Luka's always going to guard the 4s, or maybe if it's like a certain situation where maybe the 5 isn't as good offensively, but the 4 is strong. Like, you're playing Brooklyn and it's Julius Randle at the 4. Maybe you even put Kessler on Julius Randle at the 4 and you have some optionality there. But I think Zaire, in a specific context, especially if it's just him as a wing stopper and not as much as a big man defender, could make sense over Jake LaRavia. And then I also think, to go back to this, I am giving Vando the early crack in the rotation in terms of being ahead of Adu and there being a seniority continuity element here. But certainly with the way that Adu has played in Summer League, the way that Adu has flashed offensively in Summer League, and I think really progressed, I think his offensive floor and ceiling already, to me, look higher than Jared Vanderbilt's. Like, even as currently constructed, I think he's already better at catching and finishing around the rim than Jared Vanderbilt is. And there's just a real vertical pop and athleticism around the rim that his level of speed, vertical leap, and his power and strength are just, I think he's a different class of athlete than Vando. And I think overall you're starting to see that translate more with how he's playing in Summer League. So this could easily be Vando and Adu flip-flopped. I think JJ has tended to give veterans the first shot. If you go back to last season, like the way that he was using Gabe Vincent, for example, I could see Vando starting out being ahead of Adu in the pecking order, but certainly Adu having a real shot to not only jump him, but potentially just start. Like, maybe Adu, I think the big question with Adu, obviously, is the jumper, is the three-point shot. It has not really been there. I mean, that's kind of putting it kindly, but it has not been there at all in Summer League, right? And that's still a major weakness within his game. And it's just difficult to be a rotation guy on a team with championship aspirations that can't shoot, right? You see that guy get played off the floor continuously in the playoffs, round after round. The further you go in the playoffs, like, just look at the guys who are playing in the Spurs-Knicks series. Everyone, with the exception of Mitchell Robinson and Luke Cornett, could shoot and shoot at least around a league average level, if not better. And similar thing in the OKC San Antonio series. And the guys who couldn't shoot were played into smaller and smaller roles. So I think that's the big limitation right now with Adu. But even if he can't shoot better than Vando, which the bar is pretty low, I think he can dribble better than Vando. I think he can pass better than Vando. I think he can finish and catch better than Vando. So that alone might already put him ahead. I think Vando is ahead of him defensively overall as an on-ball guy, but Adu is making strides there, and his stocks and just his overall activity and motor, I think, is something that might vault him ahead of Vando. So yeah, these are my final notes on that. I mean, if we go to the third string, I mentioned it here, I don't view Kevon Looney as an every night reliable backup. Just talking to more people, watching more film on him, it just seems like he's more there for being a locker room presence, being, especially if they add Jonathan Kuminga, he was a vet and mentor to Kuminga in Golden State. So you would have the Kuminga whisperer on in the locker room, on the staff. He's a 3-time champion, but he's an old 30. He's a 30 that looks more like 38. He could barely move last season, and maybe he bounces back and changes. Like maybe this ends up being Looney in the Mamu spot, Mamu in the Vando spot, and Vando and Adu both get pushed down, and it's more of a there's not really a third center necessarily. But I do think Mamu will start the season on the bench. I think he'll be both the backup 5 and the primary backup 4. He'll get 20 to 25, 22 to 25 minutes in that role, and that will be how the Lakers end up utilizing him. So I'd probably say it ends up being close to 50-50 in terms of him 5 versus 4, maybe a little bit more at the 5. Like Kessler will probably be in, I would guess, in the 32-minute range. So that means you got 16 minutes left at the 5. Maybe Mamu plays 12 or 14 of those 16 minutes. And then Kevon Looney. I mean, at that point, you might as well just go all Mamu at the 5. And then, yeah. So the more I think through it, I think maybe Mamu's more like a 60% at the 5, 40% at the 4, because the Lakers have other guys that could play at the 4, obviously, looking at this rotation. In terms of the third string, I think Adu is the one guy who I see with the best chance to jump into the second string and usurp Vando there. DK, Jaden Hardy, I just do not see it. I think, especially with some of their counterparts here, Zaire Williams and Dalton Knecht shot the same from 3-point range last season, but Zaire is a much better defender and overall athlete and just a more versatile player than Dalton Knecht. So I don't see where he finds a role. Cameron Carr and Colin Sexton are better versions of Jaden Hardy and better defensively than Jaden Hardy. And then Bronny's the one where I guess if the Lakers, especially if there's an injury in the backcourt, or if they feel like they need a little bit more point of attack and maybe Colin Sexton isn't giving them that, I could see Bronny being maybe the 11th or 12th man in this scenario. I could see him being ahead of Looney, Hardy, and Knecht. I think based on how he closed the season, that could make some sense. But realistically, I think this is a pretty clear top 10. I would put Adu as the 11th guy, and again, some competition there between Adu and Vando for the 10th versus the 11th spot, and then probably Bronny 12th, Looney 13th, Hardy 14th, DK 15th, and that's before even mentioning the possibility that they make a trade for either a Kuminga or like a starting level forward or wing, or doing like they could just dump Hardy or Dalton Knecht somewhere else, clear a roster spot just to have one, or clear a roster spot to sign some value minimum players. So again, I think the Lakers, giant caveat here that this will probably look differently in a week or two, but I would definitely say kind of go into training camp, I would suspect that this overall looks different. Now, in terms of, we talked through starters, rotation, closers. I don't necessarily think that this group is the locked in closing group. I would say, to me, it's probably going to be matchup dependent. And this is where something that Pete Zayas, newly to Lakers Collective and of Laker Film Room, he's big on this. And I wholeheartedly agree with him that you want your team to have a clear closing 5, and ideally it's the same as the starting 5. And I don't think that would necessarily be the case here for the Lakers, which is where I continue to be a proponent of either Kuminga, Washington, some other clear starter who's better overall than Jake and better defensively than Mamu, that just slots everybody in the right roles. I still think that's a real need for this group. But right now, I think with the closers, I mean, you could go with the starters. I suspect that 4 of the 5, just like they're locked in as starters, would probably be locked in with the closing group. And then depending on the matchup, if you want to go double big, you can go with Mamu. If you need more defense, you can shift to Vando or Adu. Or maybe if Zaire continues to pop offensively, Zaire is the option, and maybe he's just the starting option overall. Or maybe Jake gets his shot back and his confidence back, and Jake is the closing guy, right? I think the Lakers still have several options there. Cameron Carr, that could be a situation for Cameron Carr where if it's an opponent with 3 guards, or maybe they don't have this like big power wing, Cameron Carr is closing. A little bit skeptical of Colin Sexton closing, both because of his defensive limitations and his size. That's to me, one of the limitations with the Sexton signing is I just don't see a ton of Sexton, Austin, Luka, at least not against good teams, because I just think that perimeter combination is too limited defensively from a ball containment and like point of attack containment perspective. But I could see any of the aforementioned guys that are starting candidates plus Cameron Carr having a shot to potentially close games. And then I want to look at the B-Ball Index lineup cards here because I think these are pretty fun. So first one, this is with Jake LaRavia as the starter. And for context, I'm using Walker Kessler's data from the 2024-25 season. Everyone else is from last season. But you see here, they have Luka as a shot creator offensively and as a helper defensively. These are based on all of his data and how he was used, all the tracking stuff. Like this is the proper slotting in their estimation for Luka. So he's obviously a shot creator, but then he's also a helper defensively. Quentin Grimes is a movement shooter offensively and a chaser defensively, which I found interesting because that's not point of attack and that's not wing stopper. That's actually more of like a secondary defensive position. Jake LaRavia is the stationary shooter offensively, which checks out, and point of attack guy defensively. Austin is a shot creator and a point of attack guy. And then Kessler is a roll and cut big and an anchor big. So this is that lineup. It projects out for an 123 offensive rating with an 111.4 defensive rating, overall plus 11.6 net rating, which is a monster number. And you look at some of the top metrics here or top areas where they rate out. On ball gravity, offensive talent, and playmaking is elite. And then defensively, big man mobile defense with having Kessler, LaRavia, and Luka. You have a certain level of mobility there. Post defense and then defensive rebounding is also strong. So this is my projected starting group. Now, interestingly, if we shift it to the Mamu lineup is actually better. And of note, the Mamu lineup is worse offensively than the LaRavia lineup, which doesn't pass the smell test to me because Mamu's a better offensive player than Jake. But so it's worse offensively, but it's better defensively. I found that counterintuitive, but that's what this projection states. So all the same labels for each of the other four starters, but with Mamu, they have him as a stationary shooter, same as Jake LaRavia offensively, but he's a mobile big defensively instead of having the point of attack label that Jake had. So I think in this case, my guess would be there's a greater variety of defensive roles. Remember, Austin is listed as a point of attack guy as well as Jake. So maybe there's a little bit of overlap there defensively, and that is leading to the defensive numbers not being as strong because just in theory, like Jake is a better defender than Mamu. Mamu's a better offensive player than Jake. If you're swapping those guys in and out, I would suspect the Mamu lineup would be better offensively, worse defensively, and then the inverse for the Jake lineup. But that's not true. So this is plus 12.9, which is actually the best net rating of any of these lineups we're about to look at. So for those who are advocating for Mamu, I think this is your strongest point here, where again, you look at it with Jake, it's about 2.5 points per 100 possessions better offensively. But then when you look at the defense, it's almost 4 points, like about a little over 3.5 points per 100 possessions worse defensively with Jake in there than Mamu. So again, I find that counterintuitive, but that is what the number's saying. If you look at here, similarly, elite on-ball gravity, offensive talent, playmaking, and then defensively, the big man mobile defense is the thing that really stands out. You're even more mobile with Mamu in there. The defensive rebounding is better. And actually, the post defense is worse going from Jake to Mamu. So make of that what you will. And then we go to the Zaire Williams option. And just to be clear here, like I tried to arrange it in terms of like the positions, but it just spits it out with the random 5-man combination here. So or they arrange it, I guess, the way that they view it. So interestingly, with Zaire, he's a movement shooter. So now you have a couple of movement shooters here with Grimes and Zaire, but then he plays that wing stopper role. Whereas they have Jake LaRavia in the point of attack role, Zaire is in the wing stopper role. So that actually, with Austin as the point of attack guy, even though I think Austin and Grimes would swap in this scenario and Austin would be the chaser, Grimes would be the point of attack guy, you have, I think, a proper slotting where Grimes is point of attack, Austin is chaser, Zaire is wing stopper, Luka is helper, and Kessler's anchor big. And those five distinctions defensively all make sense to me. And I think that all fits together. Now, as I said, this actually is the worst of the five options we're looking at. Just a plus 7.6 net rating, or technically 7.7. And the interesting thing with this is it's the second best group defensively with that 108.8 defensive rating, but the offense is the worst by a decent number here. So for whatever reason, they're calculating the fit with Zaire Williams offensively. There's a bit of a limitation there with him as the fifth starter. But yeah, I mean, I think you can't go wrong. Like, all these lineups are good. I just think, to me, it's probably more so a conversation with these first three, though I would argue more so looking at Jake versus Zaire, because again, the Mamu one, I do have some questions with defensively, despite what the numbers say. Then we get to Jared Vanderbilt, who they have as a stationary shooter and as a helper, which is interesting because you would think of Vando as a point of attack guy or as a wing stopper, but they are labeling him as a helper. This group, really good defensively. The offense is stronger than the Zaire, but not as roughly as strong as actually the Mamu, but not as strong as the Jake. But then it's worse defensively than the Mamu one, but 9.5 net rating with Vando. Just, I think that's fantasy land. I don't see JJ going from viewing Vando as like a ninth man to starting him. Even when they've been depleted, he has not started Vando. And then this is a dude Thero, who's nearly the same net rating as Vando, better than Zaire, nearly a 120 offensive rating, about a 111 defensive rating. And this is based on Adu's last season. So limited sample size, limited games, not necessarily indicative of the player that Adu currently is or is going to be, but he slots in as an athletic finisher and also as a helper. And then you see some of the post defense is actually better, big man mobility defense, etc. But I just thought this was interesting where all five, again, to recap, Jake, Mamu, Zaire Williams, Vando, and Adu, they all were plus 7.66 or better from a net rating perspective. So basically what this tool is saying is Lakers can't really go wrong. Whoever they start, it's going to be a good lineup, and it has upside on both sides of the ball. I think in terms of pure net rating here, Mamu's at the top, Jake is the second one, and then there is a drop off between those. There's like a 1 point drop off, and then between Jake and everybody else, it's at least a 2 point drop off, if not more. So you could argue that at least the lineup data states that Mamu should start. I have my reservations about that. I think it should be Jake, but you could also make the case for Zaire, and then if a dude develops offensively, you can make the case for him. But with all that said, want to jump into the Q&A here. Appreciate you guys. And as a reminder, about 40% of you who watch consistently are not yet subscribed. It would mean the world to me if you considered hitting that subscribe button. Let's get into the Q&A. LGZ, thank you for the super chat. Rookie Cam Carr versus rookie Max Christie. Similar builds. Christie was 2 years younger, wasn't a 3-and-D guy out of college, and added size. Why can't Carr do the same thing with twice the athleticism? He can do the same thing. I think I would say, and I'm as big of a Max Christie guy as there is. I had Max Christie on this podcast. I sang the praises of Max Christie. I was a strong advocate for him to start prior to the Lakers trading him. Like, I thought he should have started from day one of that season, the 2024-25 season. So I'm about as high on Max Christie as you can reasonably find. But even I would say Cam Carr is ahead of Max Christie right now. Now, I think there are some differences here that we need to get into. So offensively, Cam Carr has just much more of a bag than Max Christie does. And even, Max is a little bit older now, but even like the current version of Max doesn't have the bag that Cam Carr has. So offensively, they might function similarly in the general, especially next to Luka and Austin or like higher usage players. Okay, just go park yourself in the corner, relocate, attack in transition, attack with cuts, offensive rebounds, that type of stuff. There could be a general similarity within their roles, but Cam Carr could do far more. And I think Cam Carr is he's a 3-level scorer. He's a more dynamic and versatile and refined offensive talent. So that's a big distinction here. Now, to Max's defense, and to this point, Max was younger than Cameron Carr, and there is an element with when a guy, there's no hard and fast rule here, but the older you get, typically the more difficult it is to adjust your body and put on size and maintain your athleticism. You typically want to do that a little bit younger if you need to fill out a bit. So I would actually say that while they both came in with similar physical profiles in terms of being on the lighter side, on the slender side, that Max being 2 years younger than him was more of an advantage for Max to grow into his body at the NBA level with NBA training and nutrition and supervision compared to Carr, who's coming in a bit earlier and just already has, is like he's at where Max was 2 years into the league in terms of his development in his body and whatnot. And I would say we had already started to see some strides with Max in terms of his physicality, even if he wasn't a fully formed product yet. So I would give that edge to Max being a little bit younger in terms of filling out his body and growing into a more NBA level body from a defensive perspective. I also would say in watching them, I think Max is a little bit taller than Cameron Carr, and I've only been around Cameron a few times now, but at least in trying to, if I'm trying to recall how tall Max is versus Carr, I think Max is probably a little bit taller, but Carr has the physical tools of the longer wingspan and the higher vertical leap, where Carr is more of, to your point, that like just elite athlete that Max doesn't have the same physical tools. But what I will say is I think Max's defensive fundamentals, even coming out not necessarily as like a 3-and-D guy, are ahead of Cameron Carr defensively, right? So Carr can meet you at the rim and his elevator floor goes higher than yours and he can block you, as we've seen several times. He can also block you on threes, as he's done every game of Summer League. Max, to me, though, his mirroring of guys, his footwork, his ability, like he just had this technical foundation with his defensive abilities where I just think he's more fundamental. He's more disciplined. He's really good at mirroring guys and contesting. And I think Carr gambles a bit more. He's not as fundamentally sound or as disciplined. And so, and that was, I think, the flashes of Christie early. He obviously continued to develop on that end and has now become a pretty good defender. But those are some of the distinctions. Like I think Christie will always lead more with the defense, and then the shooting is like the secondary thing. I think Carr is way more of an offensive guy, and the defense will be the secondary thing. Now, that doesn't mean he can't add size, he can't add muscle, he can't bulk up. I think that'll help not only on the defensive end, but it'll help offensively with him absorbing contact, playing through it, etc. So there are numerous benefits for him, not having to like remake his body, but can you add 5-10 pounds at some point over the next 12 months and really start to fill out a bit and maintain that 42.5-inch vertical and maintain the speed that you have. That's the key thing for him here. But I don't like anyone saying Carr can't do it. I would disagree with that assertion. I think he can. I just wanted to kind of point out some of the similarities and differences between Carr and Christie in particular. Wannabe GM's podcast. Thank you for the super chat. Any backup bigs to keep an eye out via trade? I have not heard any names in particular. I think if you look at Dallas, of course, there could be a possibility that like Cisse, if they go after PJ Washington, maybe is there a way to add Cisse into the deal? That would be someone I would target if I'm the Lakers. If you're looking at Atlanta, I don't really see an obvious target there or someone that the Hawks would be willing to trade. So I think those are the two. Like Kuminga, we know the Lakers are pursuing him. Dallas, while they might state that they don't want to trade with the Lakers necessarily, or like the Lakers aren't interested in PJ Washington's contract. It has been reported now a couple times that Dallas is open to trading PJ Washington. So if we just take that bit of context of PJ Washington is available to a degree, those would be a couple names to look at that would fit that starting role for the Lakers. Otherwise, I have not heard any specific names. But I will note that I think if we go back to the depth chart conversation, it is a bit imbalanced. I would like another center on the roster. I would like Mamu to have the optionality to play more at the 4 and have a better option than Looney. So through that lens, I would say that if you could flip one of those, I think particularly Bronny, Hardy, or Dalton, if you could flip one of those 3 for a big man, a 5, I think that would help balance out the roster, and specifically a 5 who's better than Looney. That would be like ideally a guy who's a bit younger, a guy who's more of a lob threat, a guy who's a bit more athletic. And if you added that player plus that starter, then I think the Lakers roster is about as good as reasonably possible coming out of one offseason of major change. Laker Boya, thank you for the super chat. Buha, how close are we to SA and OKC if we get Kuminga? I'm going to take that all these upside signings hit. Roster has grown on me a lot. Luka MVP. And then he also asks, thank you for the super chat, do you think this is a deeper team than last season? I would say yes to deeper team than last season. I would especially like, because I would say with last year's group, Vando was probably more of what, the 9th man, maybe the 10th man. I think there's a real chance that Vando is like the 11th man. And if Looney actually factors into the rotation more than we're anticipating, or at least more than I'm anticipating, you could even argue Vando might be more like the 12th man, at which point I think they don't have necessarily the same top end depth. Like if you compare Kessler as the 3rd best player to LeBron or Austin last year as the 3rd best player, I do think there's a gap there. Until proven otherwise, there is a bit of a gap there from like their, the top 3 last year to the top 3 this year. And I would say even between like Marcus and Grimes, I think there's a gap as with the current information. Like Marcus was a better player than Grimes last year. Now, will Marcus stay healthy? Will Grimes develop? Those are open-ended questions I don't have the answer to. But I would say I would agree with the distinction that this group is deeper. I think the Zaire Williams addition is a sneaky addition that kind of tilts that for me a bit. And just looking at, again, if we go back to this right here, like Bronny was playing rotation minutes last year. I have him in the 3rd string and probably not even inside the top 11 of the rotation. I would say this group is deeper. Again, we could debate the starting group. We could debate the top end of the roster and how that compares. But overall, once we're talking spots like 9, 10, 11, 12, I do think I like this. And there's even more upside where what if Zaire really pops and is, at least with this current version of the group, the clear starter over Jake? What if Jake regains his shot? What if Cameron Carr, like what we're seeing in Summer League, entirely translates over to the NBA and he's just that dude? What if Adu and his offensive strides translate and he stays healthy? Like those are all X factors that I think would take this rotation to a different level. Because I think it's fairly set in stone in terms of you got the 4 starters, you got Mamu, you got Sexton. Like we know the principal members of the rotation to a degree, but they have a ton of X factors with the young guys that if any of them hit, or if all of them somehow hit, even if they're like mini hits, that would be huge for the Lakers and their rotation. As for how close are the Lakers to the Spurs and Thunder if they get Kuminga? So, I mean, you're saying like it's difficult for me to project that every guy hits, right? I just think that's unrealistic, that you rarely see a roster situation in which every single player hits. So I would say between Carr, Jake, Zaire, and Adu, you'd love if like 2 of those guys really hit. If 3 of those guys hit, you're cooking with gasoline. And if 4 hit, obviously that's like tremendous. But I would say the goal should be at least 2 of those 4 to hit, in my opinion. And then if you add Kuminga into it, I think that really slots things nice with the starters and then adds to the bench depending on who's being sent out. I would say if they add Kuminga or someone better, I think the Lakers are clearly the 3rd best team in the West. Right now, I think you can still make a case for Denver based on, you hear different things at Summer League, but it sounds like there's a chance they might just get to keep Peyton Watson and like keep actually most of they might just keep their top 6. And if they keep their top 6, like I think their top 6 is pretty good. So I think Denver would be in that conversation. No one else is in that conversation for me. I think I would have the Lakers ahead of the Wolves. I would have the Lakers ahead of the Rockets. So to me, it's really just an LA-Denver conversation where I don't love that 5th starter spot right now for LA. I would like to see them upgrade it. If they do, I think that could be like you have Kessler matching up with Jokic. You have Luka, who's given Denver a ton of problems through the years. Even Austin has given them some problems. And if it's Kuminga and Grimes as those secondary guys, I like that. So I would say if they land Kuminga, I definitely have them as the 3rd best team in the West. I think you could argue for them as high as 4th overall. I still would have San Antonio and OKC ahead of them. And I would probably have New York just giving them the respect of being a champion ahead of the Lakers and like just how great that starting group is together. They've also had a ton of reps together. So I would probably, I'd really have to, like, there's so many factors here. Where does LeBron go? I think Minnesota's got a ton of holes in their rotation. Like, how do they fill that out? Looking out east, how does Miami fill things out? How does Philly fill things out? What happens with Cleveland? Like, there's just so many moving parts that'd be tough to say, but I would probably have them somewhere, I might say like 4th or 5th overall. And it's tough to say. Like, if they get the very best version of Kuminga, I think they have a chance against either one of those teams. If they get like a medium or a median outcome, with Kuminga, then a little bit more like it's just, I don't know how good ultimately a perimeter defense built around Quentin Grimes and Jonathan Kuminga is going to be. And that's where you really need some of these other guys to pop. Because I think Adu Thero, Carr, Zaire, if they really pop in the Lakers system, that's where that shifts things for me. But I guess with Kuminga, I still think it's probably a 5 or 6 game series with either OKC or San Antonio. But that's my current read on the situation. Like it depends on, but I would say they'd be 3rd in the West and probably somewhere like a 55, 56 win team. And Luka would have a real chance to win MVP. Bri, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, what % do you think Kuminga lands in LA? Right now, I might say 55%. I think it's slightly more likely, especially if LeBron ends up in Cleveland, which that seems to be the buzz and has been the buzz for like the last week or so. If he doesn't, then I think Cleveland's going to pursue Kuminga. They'll be in the mix, and there could be something of a little bit of a bidding war for him because people are looking at the signing Kuminga and like, oh, you can only offer him a vet minimum, but teams can still sign and trade for him. Now, it does get complicated with Cleveland and their second apron situation, so that's where maybe they just don't sign Kuminga. Like, I think right now the Lakers should be the favorite to land Kuminga, but there are still open-ended questions as to what they're willing to trade for him and what type of contract they're willing to sign him to, and I just don't have the answer to that right now. Tai, thank you for the super chat. A lot of talk about if Kuminga doesn't work, what if he does work and how does he fit? Think there could be more of a balance of how things can work. I like this framing of the question. I would say the big thing for Kuminga to work that I feel like hasn't been talked about enough is particularly his shot, right? He's been a below average 3-point shooter in 4 of his 5 seasons. And there is an element, even if the Lakers find a way to bake in some ISO possessions or just to kind of feature him offensively in more than just a limited off-ball role, there's going to be an element of Kuminga just needs to be able to space the floor and hit, catch, and shoot threes. Like that is one of the most important traits offensively for any perimeter player on a Luka Austin-led offense. Like you need to be able to shoot and space the floor to a degree. Now, I think Kuminga can do far more than that, and that's where you'll see, I think he could be an on-ball screener and roller. I think he can have some of those baseline cuts or operate in the dunker spot and catch and finish, catch and draw a foul, catch lobs. He can space the floor and attack closeouts, or if you would see back more so a couple years ago than this past year, but there'd be times where teams would hide a small or a weaker defender on Rui, and the Lakers would try to leverage Rui against that mismatch. And sometimes it would go well, especially if Rui could get a deep seal. Sometimes, though, you'd see Rui would catch and face up and try to make a move, and the guy would poke the ball loose, or he would just settle for a contested jumper. I think Kuminga is far more equipped to handle that type of offensive role than Rui is. So, like, he's got the bag, he's got the ISO game, right? I think that's arguably the strength of his game, is just his overall scoring talent and athleticism. But the Lakers need far more than that, because on a team with Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, I think he's at best going to be a distant third option. That's before we even mentioned Quentin Grimes and his place in all this. So I would say if it working to me is Kuminga buying into, I'm Aaron Gordon, I'm Andrew Wiggins, I'm going to make this work, and I'm going to primarily play off the ball. I'm going to space the floor. I'm going to run hard. I'm going to cut. I'm going to get offensive rebounds. I'm going to leak out in transition. And then defensively, I'm going to defend the best wings. I'm going to box out consistently. I'm going to rotate. I'm going to communicate. I'm going to play hard. And you're going to get the best version of me on both sides of the ball in this role player context. That to me is the best version of this. And if he does that, I do legitimately think he has the upside to be. Aaron Gordon and Andrew Wiggins were the third best guys on championship teams. So, like, that's a high bar of praise that I don't necessarily feel like most comfortable going to that level. But I think there is a universe in which Kuminga can do that. He has the talent to do that. He has the athleticism to do that. I mean, you go back a couple years ago when the Warriors were depleted in the playoffs, dude was dropping 20 points nightly. Like, we've seen him be able to do that on that stage in a certain role. It's just, that's not the role that the Warriors needed from him. That's not the role that the Hawks needed from him. And it's frankly not the role that the Lakers need from him. So there's a role acceptance question here of just like, you didn't like your role in Golden State. You didn't like the contract they wanted to give you. There's mixed intel in terms of him staying in Atlanta versus him leaving. I guess theoretically there's still a chance he stays. But I think it's got to come from him of being like, I want to be in LA. I want to play for JJ. I want to play with Luka. I want to play with Austin. I want to play off those guys. And I'm willing to do whatever role they want from me. And I don't have the insight to know how that's going. Now, I would assume that the Lakers have done their intel here, have had the conversations with him, have talked to the people gathered the background, and are, if they do proceed, it's proceeding with the knowledge that, hey, Kuminga's open to this. And if he is, then great. If he's not, then obviously there's some risk there. But I think there's a chance it works. I just would say, like we would have this conversation, right, with when we talked about Giannis's potential fit. It was like Giannis would have to screen far more than he's ever screened in his life and play more of an off-ball role and defer to Luka as being the primary ball handler. And like, does Giannis want to do that? This to me is like Kuminga has to embrace an off-ball role in a way that he has not quite done yet. Doesn't mean he can't do it. It just means it's something that has not quite come natural to him up to this point in his career. And I just don't know if it ever will come naturally to him. Like, it's an open-ended question. But if he does fit, I think the athleticism, like specifically looking at the defensive matchups, he would take on that wing stopper role. And I think he could do it in a high level if he's bought in and if he's playing hard every night. And again, those are open-ended questions. The rebounding, he's a good rebounder for a wing. The athleticism, the dynamism as definitely a 2-level scorer, maybe like a 2.5 level scorer with his shot pretty up and down. Like, I see it. There's like, does he want to make the swing pass? Does he want to be a connector offensively? Does he want to not touch the ball for 18 seconds and then be more of a finisher than a creator? I don't have the answers to that, but that is the version of Kuminga that works. LA 824. Thank you for the super chat. Late voice message to Rich Paul. We have your son. Please come back. If LAL must trade Bronny, could a 3-team deal with LeBron's team and ATL land Vassar? Any other players be good for Bronny? Potentially. I guess that's the one big from Atlanta that you could talk. Now, I guess my question would be, if you're Atlanta, like, why are you just throwing Vassar in? Like, the whole point here is, like, I assume if you're doing a 3-team trade with LeBron's team for Bronny, obviously Bronny's going to that team. And then if it's the Kuminga trade, you're basically adding in the Bronny part into the Kuminga trade, which is going to be some level of, I think, Dalton or Hardy. If you add in Vando, the draft capital is going to have to be higher. It's not just going to be a swap. And so I think at that point, it's like, why does Atlanta just throw in Vassar when that was someone that they took ahead of the Lakers and really wanted in the second round? So I guess, unless I think, because again, like, they're not getting Bronny here, nor does Bronny really make sense with what they're doing. So it's like, I don't see Atlanta just throwing in Vassar for no reason, if that makes sense. I think the Lakers would have to throw in another second or something like that, another draft asset. And at that point, if you're the Lakers, you have to question if you want to do that. And I guess technically, if you're getting an asset, let's say you're getting a unprotected second round pick for Bronny, maybe that gets rerouted to Atlanta. But one thing I've tried to talk about on here consistently in terms of trade packages is, it's like, if someone walks into your living room and you have a $500 TV and it's depreciated down to like $350, well, if someone just offers you even, $400 or even upwards of $500, and they're giving you the same value or even more value than it currently is, it's not just like giving them your TV. It's like, you got to think about, all right, well, if I give them my TV, I'm not going to have my TV for X amount of days. I now have to go find another TV, and maybe TV prices have gone up and I can't go get the same level of TV that I had. And, or maybe I'm now going out and having to rebuy my TV used, and I'm making some money here, but it's like this whole process. And that's sort of my thing here of, if you're Atlanta, even if the Lakers offer you a second round pick and on paper, it's Cleveland, right? And Cleveland sending the second round pick to Atlanta. The question for Atlanta then is like, do you want the second round pick or do you want Vassar? And I would argue that Vassar going as late as he did in the 50s, I might just rather have Vassar. So even if, like, on paper, Vassar is worth it, like a second round pick because he was a late second round pick, and hey, you're getting another second rounder, like, what's the big deal? I don't know that Atlanta just gives him up for, like, fair value, right? Like, sometimes, again, I think we bake in trades that, oh, it's just fair value for this thing, but it's like, do they want to give the thing up? They might not want to give the thing up. Like, that might just be where it's at. So I think it could work. I would probably say Atlanta with Vassar. Like, maybe if the Lakers add an extra second and the other team is sending a second, and it's like, here's 2 seconds for Vassar, would you do that? Maybe they do that, but I don't think they're just going to give him up. In terms of players for Bronny, I don't have any off the top of my head. I suspect that any team trading for Bronny is going to be looking for ideally acquiring him for a second round pick, and then that's on the Lakers. If they view similarly, it's like they're now coming into the living room asking for Bronny, and it's like, well, what's our price for Bronny? Is it a second round pick? Do you want more? Like, that is a question the Lakers have to answer. Mr. J, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, thank you for pumping out good and realistic content. Could touch on some teams that would be the ones taking the players we theoretically dump, like Connect, Hardy, and Vando. Yeah, so, like, in terms of cap space teams, Brooklyn is one that jumps out. Charlotte still has a trade exception. The Clippers, technically, although they have a whole situation with Kawhi Leonard and what's going on there. So I think those are the 3 teams that jump out immediately. I'm looking at right now the remaining cap space. So I'll share this. If you look at this, so the cap, $165 million. Technically, Chicago, Memphis, and Brooklyn would all be potential suitors. I mentioned Charlotte still has a trade exception that they could potentially use, although I think if they're going to use that on a player that they don't necessarily want, they'll definitely want some assets back. I mean, you could look at here, you have under the cap, those three teams. Charlotte, Detroit is still figuring things out with Jalen Duren. Milwaukee, I think, is a potential candidate. Utah, I don't know if those two teams are going to circle the block with one another. The Lakers are right there with 196. And then you jump up big to Toronto right there around the first apron, technically above the first apron. Then these are all first apron teams and then into second apron. So I think it would have to be, if you're just dumping Chicago, Memphis, Brooklyn, potentially Charlotte into their trade exception or just onto the roster, although it's listed here as they have 18 guys, and then Milwaukee would be the other team. And I guess if we look at each of these teams, just for some fun here, like who would you potentially want back if you're looking to make a trade toward the back end of the roster? Could you potentially send out, I guess, I mean, you could also expand a 3-team trade, right? Where you do, maybe Atlanta doesn't, because Atlanta's at 15 players before even factoring in Kuminga. So maybe Atlanta doesn't want the Dalton Connect. They don't want the Jaden Hardy. Could you expand it to be a 3-team trade where you potentially get back something like Jalen Smith and Kuminga, and you have the flexibility depending on the outgoing salary to take that on? You're roughly around a little under 11 million under that first apron. And could you get like Jalen Smith as another backup big, or Zach Collins? I would, and he just signed, so I don't think that would really make sense. But you could do like Kuminga and Jalen Smith or something like that, or lower. I mean, I don't know if you're getting any of these other guys from Chicago. For Memphis, yeah, looking at down here, I mean, I like Omax Prosper. He's someone I'd be really interested in. I really like Jalen Wells, but I don't think they're just going to give him up. So I don't know if there's a clear candidate there. I like Taylor Hendricks, Brooklyn, Sharp, obviously, but he got the new deal. Some of these guys they can't trade. Yeah, I don't really see an obvious thing with Brooklyn, then Charlotte here. I just want to be clear about something. I think it was Stein who got aggregated or misaggregated with. They said Musa Cisse was Musa Diabate. Charlotte's not trying to trade Musa Diabate. He's their starting 5 right now. So I know they're sort of in a transition period, but that whole notion just didn't really make sense to me. That was a misaggregation off of Stein's report. Like it was Musa Cisse, not Musa Diabate. Sion James. I mean, these are not like the sexiest rosters here. And then you get into, I don't think you're getting Ryan Rollins, and you don't necessarily need him anyway. Jericho Sims, I guess, is the one in Milwaukee. That is the hot name in terms of a potential. Like I know a lot of Laker fans want Jericho Sims, but yeah, not the best crop of. I realized you guys couldn't see I just realized the tables I was looking at, you guys couldn't see, but I was looking at each team's cap table. So yeah, I mean, I would say it would be Chicago, some version of Chicago, Memphis, Brooklyn, Charlotte, or Milwaukee. It would probably be one of those 5 teams in terms of a dumping spot / potentially getting back a cheaper, minimum type player. Next one, the Tribe. Thank you for the super chat, or the Trib. Thank you for the super chat. In my opinion, it will be Luka, Austin, Walker locked in, and ultimately it will be Grimes and Zaire. I like our team. I think we'll be the 5th seed if healthy. Yeah, what's funny is, I know there's right now a wide range of opinions on the Lakers on their offseason and their seeding and whatnot. And for some people, I'm too optimistic on the Lakers offseason. For some people, I'm too pessimistic on the Lakers offseason. Wherever you have me in your perception of how I feel about the offseason, I think the Lakers are going to be a top 4 seed, sort of regardless of even the Kuminga situation. I think for me, it's more their playoff viability, where if they go Jake, if they go Zaire, I think they could figure out a way to make it work and be a really good regular season team, be low 50s plus home court advantage. Like, I think that's within the cards. The question for me more so is from a playoff viability standpoint. They have some unknowns, some unproven guys in the rotation. So, most of the newcomers are unproven playoff guys. And then if they don't have that wing stopper, clear starting level guy, it might not matter as much over 82 games. I think it'll matter more over 16 games, and particularly maybe not even in the first round, depending on who the matchup is, but almost certainly starting in the second round when they face OKC, when they face San Antonio. If you're in a position where Jake is starting, I think you're in a tough spot. As we saw, he wasn't really playable against OKC. If you're in a position where Mamu's starting, I don't think you have the overall foot speed and defensive athleticism in the front court to match up with those teams. So they're going to get you in the blender, and it's going to be really difficult to stay out of the blender. So I think that's where I feel their lack of that starting forward wing more. But in the regular season, yeah, I would bet on them being a top 4 seed. Depends if it's the 3 seed or the 4 seed, and that's where maybe the Kuminga, Washington, whatever addition can matter. But I think as constructed, I would say, assuming like reasonable health, I have them easily as a top 4 seed. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. And Sixers example, Quentin Grimes on Brown, Carr on Maxey, 3-guard look. So you're saying like against the Sixers, I do wonder if at least on the film I've watched, and I know also talking to Pete about this, he's watched a ton of film on Quentin Grimes, and we both share the same fear about Grimes scaling up against the bigger wings. I actually think because Brown doesn't have the sharpest handle, there might be an element of Grimes, and Grimes did play against him in that first round series, and he wasn't the primary guy the entire time, but he did get primary reps on him and did have some success. So Brown actually might be one of the few bigger wings that he can hang with, but there are like I think he could guard like the Bookers and some of those guys, but the super speedsters I think are probably a little bit too quick for him, like a Maxey, even though I think he's gonna have to guard Maxey. I just think he's a little too quick for him. And then some of the bigger guys, like if they're playing Boston and he has to guard Tatum, or if they're playing either the Clippers or the Raptors, depending on how things play out, and he has to guard Kawhi, assuming Kawhi's not suspended for the season, that's a guy who's just like too big, too strong for him. I think Cade would give him some problems as the primary guy. So that's where I think there are just some guys who are going to be too big for him and some guys who are going to be too quick / athletic for him. And that's where I would like another high-level defender out there, even higher than the Laravia Zaire range, right? Like I don't even think that is necessarily good enough, like from a playoff perspective. I think you want someone even better than that. Maybe that's Carr, maybe that's Thero, maybe that's another player that they acquire. But that's my perspective on that. But I like where your head's at. Like I would say Carr can definitely play in 3-guard looks, and that might be one of the areas he really shines in early. The Whisper, thank you for the super chat. It's crazy how much sense Marcus would have made. So I can now speak to this a bit more after coming out of Vegas. I would say like I heard 2 different things here. First and foremost, there has been this recent youth movement with the Lakers where they are prioritizing guys in their late 20s and younger. We saw most of the signings, or all the primary signings, were guys 27 or younger. And then Kevon Looney has been the one exception as a 30-year-old. But the Lakers are really looking at trying to build something sustainable here over the next few years. That's why they gave out the 4-year deals to Grimes and Mamu. Sexton, I think, was able to negotiate a 1+1 where he has some flexibility, but they would love for him to be a long-term part of what they're doing. And of course, Kessler as well with the 4-year deal, Austin, etc. So they're trying to lock up as much of this core. You still have a Adu under contract for a bit. and he'll be eventually a restricted free agent. You have Cameron Carr just starting his rookie scale deal. So they're viewing the core of this group as a group that can be together for at least 4 or 5 years down the road. So I think for them, they were trying to operate within that lens, within that operating order of operations of, okay, we want to get younger and prioritize youth, even if like on paper a guy like Marcus maybe for next season would help more than a guy like a Colin Sexton. So I think they made that decision to prioritize youth, even if on paper there might have been some better fits or better players that were a bit older, because they're not just viewing it for this upcoming season. They're viewing it as, can Colin Sexton be like our backup point guard / guard for the next 4 or 5 years, potentially, depending on how things play out. So whereas Marcus, I think there was a little bit of hesitation. Is he going to be healthy enough? Like, how is he going to age the next couple of years? Do we have to give him a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal, et cetera? Then I would say the other thing is, I heard that it was kind of unclear if Marcus wanted to be back. It ultimately, Marcus made the decision to go to Houston. Now, I don't know. I think there's probably differing versions of how that all went down, but my understanding was the Lakers really prioritized youth. I think that played out with not only the Kessler move, but then immediately Grimes, Mamu, and Sexton, and they were prioritizing youth, athleticism, dynamism, and that ultimately came instead of Marcus or Kelly Oubre. And despite, I think clearly, undeniably, Marcus Smart and Kelly Oubre were better players than Colin Sexton last season, and they both check a more important need, which is that wing stopper, perimeter defender, than Colin Sexton as a backup point guard. They did not fit with the ultimate vision of the Lakers roster. And I think I give the Lakers credit for deciding on a vision, deciding on a direction, and committing to it. Now, we'll see how it plays out. We'll see how it works out, right? But I feel like the front office has lacked vision at times with the roster build. I think they committed to a clear vision here. Now, we can debate and discuss whether we think the vision's good enough. And certainly I have my issues with the vision to a degree, but they did commit to a vision. They went out and executed that vision, and we'll see ultimately next summer kind of where they're at. How many games did they win? What seed were they? How did they fare in the playoffs? Like those are all things that are TBD and will determine how we feel about this a year from now. The Trib One, thank you for the super chat. Mamu's our backup big. He'll be one of the best backups in the league, regardless of position. I didn't think about Adu. If he gets a jumper, he could be disgusting. Carr will be a great rotation piece. Agreed across the board here. I think Mamu is going to be in the 6th man of the year conversation. I think he's going to play, again, 24, 25 minutes tonight off the bench, split time at the 5 and the 4, and it's going to be awesome. And then agreed on Adu and Carr. BT Kingsley, thank you for super chat. LD, AR, QG, JK, Jake Walker, Sexton, Carr, Zaire, Mamu, Adu, and Rich Chip Time. I'm not sure who Rich is. You're saying Nick Richards, Chip Time. I like that group. And so Vando's gone. Oh, you're JK, excuse me. JK was not Jake. JK was Jonathan Kuminga. So let me read. So you have Luka, AR, Grimes, Kuminga, Kessler, with the bench being Sexton, Carr, Zaire, Mamu, Adu, and Nick Richards. That's a really good team. That's I think that's a notably better team than right now. And I really like that starting group. I think you have some nice optionality off the bench. And I mean, this is also assuming, of course, that Carr and Adu and Zaire, at least 2 of those 3 pop in a notable way, right? Like, yeah, I mean, they're in the mix. I think, as I've stated and as others have stated, I don't know if there's a roster build that's realistic where you can distinctively say that the Lakers are like better than San Antonio or OKC, but this to me gets them more in that conversation. I still would say those 2 teams are on paper better, but obviously the game isn't played on paper. The game is played on the court, and then we'll see. Woo Wee, thank you for the super chat. Stats on Carr starting, wing stopper. So he is not in the database because he's a rookie and they don't have that option. Otherwise, I would have done Carr as well. But I would assume Carr starts out as either a point of attack defender or a chaser and not as much of a wing stopper. Because I think wing stoppers typically their primary position is the 3 defensively. And I think Carr's primary position is going to be the 2. So I could see him being more of either point of attack or chaser. King Rifa _Chifa, thank you for super chat. Yo, missed you out here in Vegas this year, bro. You think Rob waits till the season for another trade or finds a way to get off Vando or DK or both? LOL. Sorry, we missed each other. I wish you could have made it out to the meetup that we did. Shout out to everyone who came out for the meetup. Had a great time and had some media guests. Trevor came out. Raj came out. Kobe Price came out. I'm blanking on there's several other media people. Law Murray came out. There's a bunch of people who came out, and probably some people I won't name just for their privacy. If they're listening, they know who they are. But it was fun. It was awesome, and we had a great time. Had a great time meeting a bunch of you and just drinking beers and hanging out. And there will be more meetups in the future. Definitely we'll be doing at least one more, if not a couple more, out here in the LA area before the season starts. So be on the lookout for that future announcement. And also it was great meeting a bunch of you, just walking the concourse, even walking at the Wynn, running into people, a bunch of Laker fans at the Wynn because that's where the team is staying. And it was really cool to meet. I had to have met like over 30 people this weekend, just in terms of people stopping and saying what's up. So I really appreciate that. It means a ton. I would say that the Lakers end up making a trade. I think that, Kuminga is obviously the target right now, but if it's not Kuminga, there's either a potential other player that we're not really like that I'm not aware of, that you're not aware of, that maybe the Lakers going a different direction, or I could see them just doing a smaller move to get off. Like I think clearly the back end. If we go back to this back end here, and I'm gonna take your comment off for a second. I like through spot 11, maybe even through spot 12. If we really want to nitpick, I think spots 13 to 15 can be even better. I specifically look at the Hardy DK spots as like guys I just don't really see fitting with the version of this team. I think everybody else, with the exception of Sexton, and even Sexton potentially in a certain role, like everyone else has a certain level of defensive utility. I think Hardy and DK are two of the most limited perimeter defenders in the NBA, just straight up. So like I just don't see them fitting into a team that has championship aspirations this year. I don't see those guys fitting into that rotation. So I think it would be one of those guys potentially being dumped somewhere else, or obviously potentially in a Kuminga trade. And so, yeah, I think the Lakers do end up making some sort of move, at a minimum, clearing an extra roster spot to sign someone. If not, obviously the potential Kuminga trade. BT Kingsley, can we buy out DK or Vando? Technically, yes. Now, Vando, I think it wouldn't really make sense. So your two options could either be, well, you have three options. You can waive and stretch him, which we've already discussed. That would be putting his contract out over the next 5 years, including this year. But it's always however many years are remaining, double that plus one. So he's got 2 years remaining, double that. That's 4 plus 1, that's 5. So it'd be a $5 million hit for the next 5 years on the Lakers cap sheet. I think that would be a mistake. The other option could just be waiving him, but then that money would just be dead on the books this season, and you now are at 14 players. But I mean, that honestly might not be the worst of the options if you really can't trade him, but I think they are trying to hold on to it to eventually trade it at some point. And then you could agree to a buyout, but it would be similar to the waiving in the sense of Vando, I think at this point would be a minimum player. So he would need to test the market, have a landing spot for him as a minimum guy, and then they would probably agree to whatever that prorated amount is off of his contract The part I'm not even thinking about is, let me take a step back. I was thinking this year, if you actually waive him, it is going to be the hit on both years. So, I mean, waiving doesn't really make sense. I think stretching and waiving would be the call. And then a buyout, I mean, he'd probably only agree to a minimum amount for this year with the buyout. So you'd get like a discount this year of, let's just say, 3.5, 4 million, whatever that number ends up being. But you'd still have to pay the rest of the contract this year and the rest of the contract next year. So really, I think the only two realistic options with Vando are either waiving and stretching, which to me I'm kind of against based on how long that is, or trading him. But waiving him, you're still in the books for the next 2 years with him locked in on those numbers because you're not stretching it. Or if you buy out, you're still locked into whatever portion of the contract he doesn't agree to be bought out, which if I'm Vando, I'll give you the minimum. I'll give you the amount I'm going to go get from someone else. I'm not giving you a dime less or more than that back. So that's where the Lakers would just basically in either one of those scenarios just have a bunch of dead money on their cap for the next 2 years, which is not ideal. DK, technically you can. He's got, he's making a little bit over 4 million. You can waive and stretch that, which would be split over 2 years, that 2 million hit. Or you could just waive him and that 4 point whatever is on your books. You could do that. That's more reasonable than the Vando one. But I would also argue DK, you could probably just trade to someone and you might not get anything back of consequence, but you at least can probably move him. There's some team that will talk themselves into Dalton. Javier, thank you for the super chat. We need a Dalton Vando hybrid. Who's that? Well, I would aim a little higher than this. I would say they need to be a better shooter than Dalton because Dalton did not shoot the ball that well this past season. So I would aim a little higher offensively. Honestly, I'm being I'm joking a little bit here, but Zaire Williams is kind of a Dalton Vando hybrid in terms of he shot the same from three as Dalton this past year. It was actually probably better overall offensively, and then isn't quite like peak Vando defensively or like the best version of Vando defensively, but rated out kind of similarly. So I would aim a little higher on honestly on both ends, but particularly the Dalton side of this equation. It's tough. There's even the guys we talk about, Kuminga, PJ Washington, Lou Dort, Herb Jones, DJJ, Max Strus, Max Christie, all these guys have some limitation on one side of the ball. Like I think the Dalton Vando hybrid that you're talking about, like those guys are getting paid more, right? Like I think the thought process here is like, is there it also depends which Vando are we talking about. We talk about like 2 or 3 years ago Vando or like the current version of Vando. And again, like the best version of Dalton or like the current version of Dalton. That's where we get into some of the distinctions here. But I guess if you're generally talking about a guy who can be at least a 2, if not a 3 levels scorer and a certain level of a shooter, plus a really good defensive player, I mean, those guys are not, those guys are typically making 20 plus million. So that's the challenge for the Lakers in finding like that type of specific player. I guess if it's maybe the current versions of them and not like the souped up version of them, it's a more attainable build. But Jake LaRavia and Zaire Williams have some of those elements. Those are probably the closest thing they have to like true two-way guys right now. LA 824, thank you for the super chat. If Adu and Carr both hit, do the Lakers have a championship caliber starting 5? 2, besides Luka, AR, Walker Kessler, does anyone else on the current Lakers roster crack the Thunder's rotation? You're just tossing me a couple grenades here. If Adu and Carr both hit, so I guess, well, there's also, I want to make a distinction here with Adu and Carr because I think people are putting a ton of pressure on both these guys because of how they're playing in Summer League. I do want to correct the market a little bit on them of just like Adu has yet to be a full-time rotation player. So Adu becoming a full-time rotation player in and of itself is like progress and is real growth with Adu. And Carr, I think, is coming in with a certain level of expectation as a first-round pick, as a guy who's projected to go mid-first, as a guy who's been crushing it in summer league. But still, he's a 21-year-old rookie who has some real physicality or physical strength limitations that like he's going to have to figure out how to work through. I think we've seen it at times where guys will hold him off the ball and he just can't get free, or guys will just go through his chest defensively. So like he's got a little bit he has to work on. So while I see the potential with both, and I think Carr is already a rotation guy, I think Carr is going to be in the top 9, if not the top 8. I do want to pump the brakes a little bit here of like them hitting. I don't know what them hitting looks like necessarily in year one. I think longer term, both guys can be starting level players, but that might be like a 2 or 3 year process. It's not necessarily going to all happen in year one. So I just want to be clear about that. That like I don't think it's fair to go into the season and be like, Adu Thero and Cameron Carr, you are the Lakers saviors. You both need to hit, and if you don't hit, the Lakers don't have the proper ceiling. Like I don't think that's. I'm not saying you're saying that, but I have seen that like general sentiment out there of just like, oh, well, these guys are gonna hit or like have to hit, otherwise the Lakers are screwed. And I don't agree with that framing, but I also think it's unfair to them to put like that amount of pressure on a second-year player who is a second-round pick, dealt with knee stuff all season last year, and then a first-round pick who's just coming in as a rookie. Like, I think it's a hit or a win for the Lakers if like both guys clearly are rotation level players, which I think they both can be. That's a hit. Now, putting them as like starters on a championship team, that's a different tier. That's Carr going up like multiple tiers. That's Adu going up multiple tiers. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm to be clear, I'm not saying that. I just think that's a tall order to ask of second and first year players who up to this point neither has been like a full-time rotation guy as an NBA player. Obviously for Carr, he hasn't had the opportunity. For Adu, he was dealing with some injury stuff. The Lakers viewed him more as a project last year. And so I think if they hit, to me, it's more so them hitting as rotation guys, not them hitting as starters. I just want to make that distinction clear. So I would still say the championship level starting 5 would have to come in the form of a trade, be it Kuminga or someone else. I still would say they need that final trade piece. And Kessler's got to be clearly a top 10 center. Grimes has got to hit in a meaningful way, be ideally a 70th plus percentile guy on both sides of the ball. Like, it's not just Adu and Carr that need to hit. Austin needs to prove that the first 2 months of the season, he could do that for the full season and he could stay healthy, right? Luka needs to be back at MVP level. And honestly, I think closer to his March level than anything. Like, there's a lot of things that have to hit for the Lakers to be true contenders and really maximize their ceiling. So Adu and Carr are parts of that. I want to pump the brakes a little bit because I think some of the expectations for those two guys are getting ridiculously high. And if they continue to progress, they hit every checkpoint, and we're having this conversation, training camp, preseason, they're crushing it in preseason. They're looking great. Okay, we can restructure, we can reframe the conversation. But for now, I think it's like they've looked great in summer league. They are trending toward being rotation guys. That is awesome. And that should be celebrated. And that should be the focus right now, in my opinion, not them being like championship starters against the Spurs or the Thunder or the Knicks or whoever. As far as the second question, definitely agree that those three would start. In terms of the Thunder rotation, I think Mamu is better than Jalen Williams. Now, I don't know how their rotation is going to play out with Mara and whatnot, but like I would say Mamu is a better version of Jalen Williams. I think Jalen Williams is probably a little better offensively. I mean, retract that. Jalen Williams is better defensively than Mamu. And there were at times, especially in that San Antonio series, where they put him on Wemby instead of Isaiah Hartenstein or Chet that I think there's something with Jalen Williams where he's just a little bit better defensively, but Mamu's definitely better offensively. And I think they're like similar level shooters. Jalen Williams will get him up, let him fly. I'd probably say Mamu's a better shooter, but Mamu's definitely a better passer, better connector. I think a better DHO guy. Like Jalen Williams could do all those things as well. I just think Mamu's a better version of that. So I would say I would slot Mamu ahead of Jalen Williams in that role. Then, I mean, so I guess we would have to look at the off the top of my head. Like I'll say, I assume they would probably go with the same starting group, right? And or for now, tentative. Like if I was OKC, I'd actually start AJ Mitchell or Kason Wallace. I would say over Dort. But if they go with the same starting group, I actually think I'm lower on Dort than consensus, but I'm very high on the rest of OKC's group. So I would actually say Quentin Grimes compared to Dort, I think they're overall probably similar impact level players, and Grimes might even have the edge, especially as he is elevated in a bigger role. I would say I would take AJ Mitchell, Kason Wallace, and Alex Caruso ahead of Quentin Grimes. I would take them ahead of Colin Sexton, Carr, like at least for like this season, right? If we're talking like winning a championship, playoff rotation, Zaire, Jake, Vando, all these guys. So I do think their perimeter depth is ahead of the Lakers. All those guys, Kason Wallace, Alex Caruso are perennial all defense guys. AJ Mitchell, we saw what he did to the Lakers, but he looked like a future all-star and was their fourth option. Like I would take those guys over the Lakers' rest of their perimeter guys. But I would say Grimes to me, like he's better than the Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins spots, which they lost. So Grimes versus Jared McCain, we saw Philly chose Grimes over McCain. They ended up losing Grimes, but I guess like he would kind of be in that, to me, somewhere in that maybe ninth man role for OKC. And I don't think Sexton would be in the rotation. I think McCain's better than Sexton, and that like these other guys probably not. So yeah, I mean, I guess I would look at it the four starters outside of the fifth guy plus Mamu would be the guys I think would play. And everyone else would probably not play in OKC's rotation. But with the exception of Carr, Carr could potentially, could he be better than Isaiah Joe or Aaron Wiggins? Like, yeah, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Could Adu be better than those guys? Like, yeah. So I would look at those two guys, maybe Zaire if he continues to develop offensively. But for me, I would say the locked in guys that would play on OKC would be of course, Luka, Austin, Kessler, but I would also add in Grimes and Mamu here. Javier, thank you for the super chat. Carr, Adu, Vando, and draft picks for Watson at $23 million win. I would do this in a heartbeat. I don't think Denver would do this. Let me take this back, actually. Not in a heartbeat. I actually didn't realize you had Carr and Adu both in here. So you have Carr and Adu and Vando and draft picks for Watson. I actually wonder if Denver would consider this at least, because you'd have cost control with Carr and Adu plus getting back the picks. Like you do save the money. You keep Johnson and Brown. But I mean, my understanding, at least talking to some people this weekend, is like they just think Watson's staying in Denver. They're going to squeeze him. He's going to get a lower contract, and then they're going to have to figure out how to save some money at some point in the future. But I think you remember they were asking for a Walker Kessler style package. This is not a Walker Kessler style package. And even if we can acknowledge like they're almost certainly not going to get a Walker Kessler style package, this isn't even in the same ballpark as a Walker Kessler style package. I mean, if you want to say Carr is a first round level player, obviously he is, but like if you want to say that's the equivalent of like a first round pick, okay, then like Vando, Adu, and picks, and picks being second rounders plus one swap. I just don't think that's, I mean, maybe at most you could argue this is like the equivalent of like two picks without two pick swaps. But if you're the Lakers, like, there's some risk here of you don't know if Peyton Watson can stay healthy. Carr and Adu have started to pop. This is an interesting one. Like, I think you would be fortunate if Carr ever gets to the level that it looks like Peyton, like I think if on an open market, Peyton Watson was going to get 25-ish million. And so you would want Carr to eventually grow into being that type of player. I think even if like, there's no guarantee he gets to that level where Peyton Watson was, I think at times the third best Nugget last season, like that on a team that won, in the mid 50s. This is an interesting one though. I would say I would say this is the probably the fairest trade I've seen for Watson proposed in here. But I understand, especially coming off the high of Summer League, people are not going to want to trade Carr or Adu. So I get that. I do think the current version of Watson, we've at least seen what the potential could be, which is there was a stretch in the season, dude was averaging 20 points per game, shooting 40% on threes. Like that is a high ceiling now, and being a really good defender. Now, can he sustain that? I don't know. Can he stay healthy? I don't know. But it's an interesting one. And you get off Vando in this trade as well. So even if you don't love giving up Carr or Adu, you get back the best player in the deal and you get off Vando. So that's a really interesting one. Zinc, thank you for the super chat. What do you think is holding up the Kuminga trade, dominoes, contract negotiations, the Hawks? I think it's all those things, particularly dominoes. I think the biggest thing right now is the LeBron situation and how that potentially impacts Kuminga's market. But there certainly is the trade negotiation and the contract negotiation with the Hawks that is still being determined. But I would not be surprised if once LeBron makes his decision, we see a quick or a relatively quick resolution with Kuminga. Devil's Knight, thank you for the super chat. Thought experiment. Build your ideal team using this year's team and last year's players with 2026 salaries with this year's cap. LeBron on a minimum. Okay, well, so give me Kessler. We'll go. I mean, can I get Austin on last year's deal or is Austin on this year's deal, right? Like that's a big swing factor. But I guess if we're going this year's salary, right, but the pool is last year's players and this year's players, I will go. I'll start from the starting group and build out. I will go Kessler, LeBron, Marcus, Austin, Luka. That would be my starting group. And that's LeBron apparently on a minimum because that seems like what he's going to sign. Obviously, depending on the situation, might be able to get more, but like tentatively, we'll say LeBron on a minimum. Marcus making 6.5. I would take that. Spoiler alert: Vando is not on this team. So Vando, you cleared out the 12 million for you could fit in Marcus. Then I think you go. I would have Grimes, Mamu, Rui, Luke as those four, and then Carr and Adu. That's 11, and that would work because Rui's making 14. So that almost offsets the Vando situation entirely. But then you have Luke making 6.5, Grimes, Mamu. So let me just make sure that this works. It might get. LeBron making the minimum is really what allows this all to work. But I guess if we look at, I'll pull up this year's. So you have Luka, Austin, Kessler, Grimes, Mamu. You swap in Rui for Vando, so that adds $1.5 million. But remember, you're hard capped at the first apron, so the Lakers are roughly like $10.5 million under the first apron, so they can still add to their group up to $10.5 million. So you swap out Vando, put in Rui. That's plus 1.5. I would swap out Jake and put in Marcus. Or actually swap out Hardy, put in Marcus. Now you add half. So now you're plus 2 overall. Still have Sexton, still have Arabia, still have Hardy. I would swap out Dalton for Jackson, go up 1.8. So now you're up almost 4. Keep Carr. Looney. I guess Looney's a casualty here just based on like the in and out. I'd rather have the open roster spot, to be honest, especially, I guess basically the guys I would not be bringing back. I wouldn't be bringing back DA. I wouldn't be bringing back Kleba. And I would have Mamu and Jackson as the backup 5s, and Mamu could also play the 4. You'd have LeBron and Rui at the 4 as well. And then defensively, you'd have Grimes and Smart with the upside still with Carr and Adu as well. So basically I'd be getting rid of Vando, Hardy, DK, and Looney. And then I'd be adding LeBron and those guys. And I guess I'd be getting rid of those 4 and I'd be re-adding LeBron, Marcus, Rui, Luke, and Jackson. So I guess I have to get rid of one more. So I'm between. Well, if you get rid of Bronny, then I don't know if you're getting LeBron back in that case. But yeah, I mean that to me is a pretty coherent 15-man roster. I mean, if you really want to save money, you could just get rid of Sexton and swap in one of those guys for Sexton, and then. But you're still under the first apron, so yeah. I mean, I like that. That's a fun one, and that's a team that. I mean, that would be a special team in my opinion. Zink Thomas, thank you for the super chat. DJJ was a minimum guy before he played with Luka, right? Any chance Williams could follow a similar trajectory with Luka, former number 10 pick? Yeah, like I do. So I understand a lot of people have mentioned this. People have mentioned, remember PJ Washington, how he was viewed. Like, I think there is something to playing with Luka and the boost you get. I think we saw it with DA. We saw it with Jackson. You just see it, like you get a certain type of shot quality, and it's just like, it's different playing with him versus playing with almost anyone else. The only like counterpoint I would have was like, just because I think with DJJ and PJ, there had been flashes, right? And I would argue even more flashes than Zaire, but we could debate that. And like, they unlocked it with Luka, but I don't know if you like just want. I think ideally you're not just being like, well, let's just take a bunch of minimum guys and like hope that Luka unlocks the best version of them. Like, I don't think that's necessarily the best strategy either. I think there needs to be more of a balance. And right now, point I've been making on here, point I've been making on Lakers Collective is the Lakers are kind of going tight end by committee here with the defensive wing. And it's like, well, let's hope Quentin Grimes takes a leap. Let's hope Jake gets his shot back and is playable. Let's hope Adu pops offensively. Let's hope Cameron Carr bulks up a bit. Let's hope Zaire develops offensively. And like, it's really, they're like throwing 5 or 6 guys out there, and their goal is like 3 or 4 of those guys can be real rotation guys against OKC, San Antonio, etc. And I understand that, but I also believe I don't think it's ideal to also just ignore proven commodities either. And like, of course, you can't build a perfect roster with every single position or need is maxed out, right? Like there's no such thing. Even the Thunder, the Spurs, the Knicks, they all have their weaknesses. They all have their limitations. Like, no roster is perfect. No team's depth chart is perfect. But I would argue that like after the center spot, the next most important thing on a Luka Austin team is that elite perimeter defender. And maybe Zaire gets there, but I don't think just because DJJ and PJ did that means it's automatically going to happen. Like, I think there's a little bit of projection or wish casting with that I just would be a little cautious of. But certainly what I would say was like, there is a track record here. There is a proof of concept of, if you get a young, relatively raw, unproven player and put them with Luka, he can help unlock a different version of them. And that's the bet right now with Zaire. That's the bet with some of these other guys. So yeah, I mean, there definitely are some similarities with DJJ and Zaire. I would say one big difference for me is like DJJ was already doing some of those like dirty work role player things where like he's a better offensive rebounder. He's a better defensive rebounder. I think he's a better cutter than Zaire. I think he plays with a little bit more motor than him. So like there are some things with DJJ that Luka unlocked the offense, right? And the cutting and the alley-oops and some of that stuff. But and also like he got to be featured on a team that made the finals in a special defensive role. But I would also argue like I think he's a little bit more inclined to some of those role player dirty work things than a guy like Zaire is by contrast. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. No lock on Kaluma into two-way. Why? What are his flaws? I mean, it's a fair question. I would say his flaws, in my opinion, like he's not. I think he's an okay to solid rebounder, but I think you'd probably want better rebounding for a player of his size. I think defensively, some of the playmaking and just impact stuff, he's a pretty low stocks and block or steals and blocks guy, stocks guy. There's not a lot of defensive playmaking there. I mean, that's it. Like, I'm trying to grasp at things here and try to find the little nitpicks with him. Otherwise, like, I just really like his game. I think he should be a two-way. I think after Magnon, he's like the clear choice. Like, I don't even care who they pick between AK or Suter. Like, put Kaluma there. And I think if they mess around, if he has a monster game against Chicago, like, someone's going to lock him up. And I mean, you could even argue, like, if he continues to play like this, like, he might even get a 15th roster spot somewhere. So, yeah, I mean, I would say, like, the rebounding and the defense overall are maybe not exactly what you want from a player of that level, but I think the shooting is so good, the offense is so good, and the other things are at like a baseline level to. And I would say I think he's solid defensively. I'm not saying he's not, but like, he's not a stopper. He's not this elite motor rebounder necessarily. So he is more of an offensive guy. He is more of a shooter, and does bring some of those other things. But like, I think clearly his shooting and the attacking the closeouts are the things that are going to translate at an NBA level. So, I mean, that would be it. But even then, I think he's better than AK or Suter. So I don't really get it. Is he a real one? Veda, real MC. Thank you for the soup chat. Is Kuminga waiting on Braun? Is the real issue with PJ Washington that we don't have enough assets? How much longer will we wait for this last move? So I guess in reverse order, I would say I'd be pretty surprised if the last move comes before LeBron's move, unless potentially Kuminga gets like a heads up that, hey, it's just, we're not interested in you, or it's not going to work out here. And then maybe he proceeds at that point. But I think it will likely be after the LeBron situation is resolved, which could be tomorrow, but also could go into next week. So I think we're still in a holding pattern here. I don't think Kuminga's like explicitly waiting on LeBron. I actually think it's more so the teams that Kuminga's market is a bit on hold right now, with several of those teams being in the LeBron sweepstakes. So again, right now, Kuminga can't go to some of these teams for more than the vet minimum. So I don't think it's that. I think it's more so, will that team do a sign and trade with Atlanta and send out some stuff to acquire Kuminga? And none of those teams are going to pick Kuminga over LeBron. So they're waiting to figure out what's going on with LeBron. And I don't know necessarily that the I think they have enough for PJ Washington in a vacuum. And that's a callback to a conversation we had earlier today on Lakers Collective for those who are watching that. But I think there is some context here of, it might cost all of their draft capital, which I don't know if they want to necessarily give that up. There's also the complicated nature of a potential trade with Dallas, which I think is the backdrop to all this, right? So I think they could do it if Dallas was willing to play ball. But I mean, it sounds like the Lakers might have some skepticism of the contract, right? And just how his game might age, or just the fit there. So I disagree with that, but that seems to be how they're playing it, at least publicly. So I have maintained, I feel like they're higher on PJ than they're probably letting on, but we'll see. BT Kingsley, thank you for super chat. Car, poise, confidence, and shot. I see rookie Bean too far. Yeah, I mean, I guess rookie Bean is different than fully formed Bean, right? I assume you're not saying he's going to be on the Kobe trajectory, because I would say that is too far in my opinion. For as much as I like Cameron Carr, I just that's hollowed ground that I just don't. He would have to make some real strides over the next few years, like monster strides year over year over year. Because just think about where Kobe was when he was 21. I mean, that was around. If I'm not mistaken, that was right at the first finals against the Pacers, where he made that leap in the finals and went to a different level. And then from that point on was, I think particularly like 2001 on was just top 3 player for a decade. So that is a different level for me. But I could see, like, I will say the confidence, the poise. I like the I'm not a pretty boy. I'm here to do more. Like I like some of that stuff, right? So I'm not like, I see what you're getting at, but that comparison is a step too far for me. And even Kobe as a 17-year-old rookie, I think had some had some stuff to his game. Like, I mean, Kobe was wired differently. Kobe was different. So I don't know if I can compare anybody to Kobe, but I can see, like, if we break it down to certain elements, I see what you're talking about. But that one for me is a little, I can't go there. Zinc, thank you for the super chat. Is OKC still trying to offload Dort, trade potential? That one I have not heard really an update on. I would say that my read on the situation is that OKC is not going to offload Dort to the Lakers, and they might just eat the tax bill or trade him elsewhere. But I would be pretty surprised if OKC helps the Lakers at all. And then Zinc follows up. What about Najee Marshall cheaper than PJ? I would say cheaper than PJ, but I would also say I don't know that Najee is a starter on a team that wants to win a championship. I think he could be a high-level bench player. I also think there's some shooting. Like, if we have some concerns about PJ's shooting, I think Najee is another one in that bucket and isn't as big as PJ or isn't as good of a rebounder as PJ. So, like, sometimes the cheaper alternative is better or close to the same value. Sometimes the cheaper is too cheap. And I think this might be one of those cases where if you're going, I would say there's multiple guys I would want above Najee if you're not going PJ. If you think PJ is too expensive, if you don't like the cost, whatever, okay, then there's multiple avenues I would rather examine or explore rather than Najee. And then you can maybe get to Najee, but I don't even think there's a tier difference between them. I would personally say there's at least like a 2-tier difference between Najee and PJ. So my goal would be to get someone on PJ's tier or on the next tier in between them. Suzui, thank you for the super chat. Don't know why people are high on Minnesota, LAL over Minnesota and Houston. I agree. I said that earlier, so I don't know if that was in reference to what I said earlier, or maybe you missed what I said earlier. I think the Lakers are ahead of both the Timberwolves and the Rockets as currently constructed. So, I mean, I would say that there's a proof of concept with Minnesota where Ant, McDaniels, Rudy Gobert, they've been to multiple playoffs together. They have been to a couple conference finals together. Gobert has maintained as one of the best rim protectors, defensive anchors in the league. McDaniels has grown on both sides of the ball. Ant, I think, probably has like another level that he could even get to. That's before we mention LaMelo. So there is a ceiling there. And I do believe in Minnesota in a playoff context of those dudes are tough as nails. And every single postseason, they punch above their weight. Like, that, to me, is an intrinsic thing within that group that I specifically look at Ant and Jaden McDaniels as those are playoff risers. Those are dogs. Those are guys that are just tough outs in the playoffs. And we saw that back-to-back years conference finals. This past year, whooped Denver, went to the second round, and were on fumes. Multiple guys out. DiVincenzo out, Ant out, Ayo eventually out. I mean, they were broken down, and they still were giving San Antonio some problems. So that's a tough group that I think I'm lower on in a regular season context. I'm higher on them in a playoff context, but still I would have them regardless of that. Like, I would put them behind the Lakers. Houston, you know how I feel about Houston. That was one of the most embarrassing series I've ever seen from a team in that first round. Creative by Design. Thank you for the super chat. DJJ plus Matherin for Vando, DK, Hardy. Thoughts, Jovan? I would do that in a heartbeat. I would flip this to you. Why would the Clippers do this? I mean, I assume you're throwing in all your draft capital at this point with the 3 seconds and the first. Like, that's basically 2 starting level guys for 2, in my opinion, like fringe roster guys, and then a minimum level guy who's making $25 million over the next 2 years. So I don't see why the Clippers would do this at all, even potentially with the 3 seconds and the swap. Like, I think if they put Matherin on the table, I think Matherin or DJJ could probably individually fetch a similar return to what the Lakers are offering. You add both of them together, and I think if they're like, these 2 guys are available, I think they would get a better trade package in a heartbeat. Hey, Laker, thank you for super chat. Are the Lakers hands tied next offseason free agency wise? No, the Lakers. So if we look at, I'll pull this up here. If you look at their next season, so let's look at 2027, 28, the Lakers. So if you go to this next season, you have, Luka makes a jump, Austin makes the jump, but it's a smaller jump now. Kessler, Grimes, etc. You have Vando will opt into his player option, Sexton TBD, DK, Hardy, team options. I believe both will be declined if they're still in the Lakers, and then Adu and Bronny. Adu will be picked up. Bronny, I think, would be TBD at that point, depending on how his season goes, or again, if he's still a Laker. But the Lakers have, as of right now, they have $199 million in money and nearly $13 million in cap holds. However, that to me would, if they got rid of, that's with the team option. So if they got rid of DK and Hardy, for example, that's nearly $12.5 million off their sheet. That would get them down to 187, and that's before mentioning the cap holds of, I don't know where their cap holds are on here right now, but there is a version where, especially if Sexton opts out, the Lakers could comfortably add a player with the non-taxpayer MLE, and that's partly why Austin took the pay cut. That's why Mamu has a dip in his year 2 as well. So no, I mean, what I would say is if the Lakers add Kuminga or they add another high-level starting wing forward, that contract will likely prevent them from being able to add someone next summer with the non-taxpayer MLE. So it would almost be a form of pre-agency where they're like, hey, looking at the non-taxpayer mid-level market, we don't love it. So we'd rather just add Kuminga now rather than wait till next summer to add a potentially worse player or a worse fit and just not have that for this season. So that's the big, I think, question they're trying to weigh right now is like, if you add Kuminga, if you add PJ Washington, if you add someone else, if you add DJJ, whatever, you're pretty much locking in. Now, DJJ is an expiring contract, so that's a little bit of a different story, but you pretty much are you theoretically would only trade for DJJ if you're going to re-sign him, right? So you are doing your version of acquiring that player with the future non-taxpayer MLE now, and then going from there. Easy peasy. Thank you for the super chat. I would have Adu and Zaire over Jake. If he doesn't shoot it off the catch, he stops the possession, drives with no intention, gets caught in no man's land. This was I've been waiting on the anti-Jake starting take, and I'm glad that you provided it. I understand it. For me, I would just say that I'm trying to read the tea leaves as best I can. I'm looking at the roster. I'm looking at how JJ used Jake last season. And I think Jake, in my opinion, like unfairly to some degree, became the new punching bag after Gabe. I get it. I think he did not shoot well enough the second half of the season, and honestly for the entire season. Like, he had a couple good shooting months. Outside of that, he was an inconsistent shooter. I do think his defense, his rebounding, his toughness, his availability every single night was something that some people overlook. And to me, on a group that lacked availability, lacked toughness with some players, lacked defense, lacked rebounding at times, like those were all things that he brought consistently that so, I mean, Adu was not healthy for most of the last season. Vando was not healthy for the entirety of the season. Guys get banged up, guys deal with stuff. Jake was always available. So I think there is an element of that, of like the best option sometimes is the guy who's available. And that is Jake, or at least based on how last season went. I also would look at anytime JJ had a decision to make with who to insert off the bench to start, it was often Jake. He started over half the season. So like in theory, we think about, well, Marcus was the starter or Rui was the starter, or like those were, one of those guys was starting, one of those guys was the sixth man. Well, Jake started over half the season. And so like Jake really was the seventh man if we're going over like the totality of the season. And that, to me, maybe I would say Zaire is the one who, again, I think it's more of a competition between Zaire and Jake. And Zaire, to me, does have the upside on both sides of the ball to outplay Jake and take his spot. Adu, I think the limiting thing will just be the shot. And if he's shooting like Vando, I just don't see him starting. I think it's just tough to start a player who shoots like that, but he does have the upside to like, I'm not ruling it out entirely. I would just say right now, I would definitely pencil him in behind Jake. And then to me, it's between Jake and Zaire. Andres, thank you for or is it Andre? Thank you for the super chat. Ideal scenario for the Summer League team. Magnon gets a roster spot and Kluma gets a two-way. That's a version of this. I would definitely say the latter part has to happen. I think Kaluma has to get a two-way, but Magnon getting a roster spot, I'm cool with. Like, would I rather have Magnon or Jaden Hardy? I'd rather have Chris Magnon. So if you could dump Jaden Hardy and add Magnon and he slots in as, you could technically go with him or Bronny as the one, the other one as the two. Like, I just think he fits a need on this group better than Jaden Hardy does. So that one I'd be open to if that's like the swap. But obviously right now, unless they're doing a 2-for-1 trade or they're dumping someone, they don't have a roster spot. So that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, sure. I would take, between the two, I would lean Magnon for the roster spot over Kaluma, but Kaluma has to be on a two-way, like yesterday. Zinc, I think for the super chat, do you think Luka can stay in his prime until 35? Yeah. I think Luka's game is going to age well because he's not I think the guys who tend to age the worst, I mean, there's an injury component here, right? Like, he just has to stay healthy. That's maybe the biggest thing. But aside, like, assuming relative normal health, I think some of the more athletic guys are the guys that you see once they lose the athleticism, especially if they're not a certain level of shooter, they are just not the same player offensively. And I think Luka, while he does have a unique blend of strength and like his decel is second to none, and he clearly can create his shot under any scenario and against any type of defense, he is not someone who's necessarily reliant on like speed or athleticism or whatnot. And then he also is definitely above like that baseline level of shooter that you need to age well. So yeah, I don't, barring injuries, I don't see why. Now, like prime is, I would say with like prime, that's a different, like, are you asking, is Luka going to average 34, 7, and 8 when he's 35? That might not be realistic. I don't know, but definitely I would say into his early, like, the next 5 to 6 years or so. And then can he still be like an all-star, all-NBA guy at 35? I would say, yeah. Is he going to be exactly how good he is now or in the same ballpark? That I'm not quite sure of. Jay Fish, thank you for the super chat. Car's fluidity reminds me of Zach LaVine. I like that. I do see that. I think like LaVine is a special 0.001% athlete where I would say I even think there's a difference between LaVine and Carr, despite Carr having such a high vertical. But I see what you're talking about. There is like this gliding element with Carr, the fluidity. I see the shades of Zach LaVine, and I know some people have made that comparison overall with this game, and I do see it. I will, like, there's a Zach LaVine, Thompson twin, like certain, LeBron. There's just a certain type of athlete that I think exists in their own tier. I don't know if Carr is quite like Adu, honestly, is kind of that level of athlete. Carr is like the next tier below that, but I do see the shades of LaVine. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. If Vando and DK for Kuz for 1 year, next year, how much cap? So you would just take off Vando and DK from the cap. And if you take off Hardy, it's almost 26 million off. So yeah, the Lakers would be like just over the cap. So they'd be at, the cap is projected 174. Lakers would be at roughly like 176. That's not factoring in cap holds, which it has. I think they have cap holds here for Laravia and Looney. But yeah, they'd be roughly a little bit above the cap. So yeah, that'd be a real boost to the cap sheet. Tom, thank you for the super chat. Vando has a bad contract, but at least he has some useful skills. Considering this group, is there a reality where he plays would prioritize DK or Hardy trade? Also, as Rob Lowe and Rob Pelinka brothers. So what I would say to this is, I would argue that this team currently, while they don't have like the high end, I don't think any perimeter guy is as good as Marcus was last year, where I think Marcus should have been more of an all defense second team candidate than he actually was. And he wasn't eligible because of the games, but like, I don't think anyone right now is as good as Marcus was last year. Like a guy you could play 30 minutes a night. He's going to give you they were a pretty good defense with Marcus on the floor single-handedly, basically. I don't see any of the 1 through 4 guys being at that level. I think Adu could grow to that level, and we'll see what happens with Zaire, Carr, etc. But like realistically, within like the next 12 months or within the next calendar season, I think that's a tall task. However, I would say I think there is more depth defensively with this group. And again, going back to that tight end analogy of just having 3 or 4 tight ends on your fantasy football roster, and you're just hoping one of those guys pops, that if they're a backup, maybe someone in front of them gets injured or just they flash something. And like, that's kind of the Lakers by committee approach here with the wing defense. So I would actually argue that while to your point, like you maybe need more of that Marcus replacement with like the high level defense, that there's so much depth that like, I almost wonder if Vando is like more expendable on this current group. Cause I would argue like 2 years ago, the Lakers barely had 6 playable players in the playoffs, and Vando wasn't one of the 6 players, or at least in JJ's viewpoint, he was not one of those 6 players. Last year, when the Lakers got healthy, Vando was the first guy to go out of the rotation. LeBron comes back. Vando's a DNP CD 8 straight games. Like, this is where I think I sometimes I'm like, I don't see what people are not seeing in terms of how, and I'm not trying to pick on you, but like how JJ views Vando. Like, just don't take how I feel Vando. Don't take how anyone else feels about Vando. Look at how JJ feels about Vando. The 2 times they got healthy last year, Vando was racking up DNP CDs. So I'm like, and then previously he's like battling Jordan Goodwin for 8th man role on the team. Like, so I just, with having this many options with Carr, with Adu, with Zaire, like with Mamu also being able to play the 4, like I almost wonder if he's even squeezed more, because I would argue they have more depth at that position now. Even if Vando is on paper the best defender of that group, they've needed Vando's defense before. They've needed the motor before. They've needed the rebounding before. JJ just doesn't view it at a certain level. And so I would actually argue, I think there's a greater chance that, like, especially if Carr and Adu just hit, Vando's probably the guy out of the rotation. Like, I would say, to me, coming into next season, Zaire Williams is ahead of Vando in the rotation. Zaire Williams is going to play more than Vando. Zaire Williams has a more locked-in role than Vando. I think, and I would say the same thing with Jake. Like, again, I think it's between Jake and Zaire starting. Vando's not in that conversation, in my opinion. Like, we can have that conversation. We can say, hey, would it be great if Vando started? Or, like, they could use this skill set or this or that. That's just not how they view it. And until they show, until JJ proves otherwise, I don't see why we would change that perspective. Like, he just has shown he doesn't believe in him. And if we go back to like DA, once JJ started benching him in 4th quarters, there were some games he closed games. There were some times he played in the 4th. There was also a lot of times he just didn't. And like JJ midway through last season was just like, I don't really trust DA. I'm not going to play him in the 4th a lot. That was just it. So yeah, I mean, I think that's just how he views Vando. Zinc, thank you for the super chat. Last question. Any chance we go after Nick Richards still? Don't love Mamu as the backup 5 defensively. Still a possibility if they just dump someone, but it obviously would have to be a roster clearing move. So he's still out there, so there's still a chance. But I've not heard him attached to the Lakers for what that's worth. Tyler, thank you for the super chat. Aside from Embiid, Grimes is why Philly beat Boston. His defense against Brown and Tatum was elite. He's an elite defender. Look at his metrics. I have looked at his metrics, and I've come around to Grimes as a defender. I would say looking into his numbers and watching the film, I am higher on him now defensively than I was like immediately following the move. I would say elite defender is like, I don't know if I'd go that far. I think he still needs to prove it over, like he did 2022-23 season in New York. That was his best defensive season. He was an elite defender then. I would say last year he was more of a good defender than an elite defender. But yeah, I mean, I would also say context is important here, where he was an elite or good to elite, however you want to classify him, in a bench role, not as a starter. So there is a difference in, like, we want to win a championship and we want you to be our leading defender. That is a little bit of, I think Kelly Oubre played a role in this. Obviously, Maxey, I think, played a role in this, not defensively, but offensively. Like, I think there's more to it than just Embiid was awesome. I think Grimes was awesome in the series. Maxey wasn't quite himself, but still was leading the charge as the engine. Oubre had some moments. But like, I get your point that Grimes was a big part of it. I've rewatched parts of the series. I'm planning on rewatching more. I'm doing a film breakdown on Grimes. I don't know if I'd agree with like elite, but I would agree with good. Now, even if he's elite in a bench context, which to this point, like he was guarding those guys, he wasn't guarding those guys like 40 minutes tonight, but like, sure, he was guarding those guys. There's just a different level of like starting and doing it every single night. That's my question with him, but I think he has the upside to do it. So like, I'm fine with him as a point of attack guy. I do have some more questions about him as a wing stopper, but obviously doing it against Brown and Tatum is good stuff. Like I would also, for some context, like I would say Tatum was not the same player. He got close to maybe being the same player, but I do expect like next year's version of Tatum to be, he was not a top 10 player last year in the playoffs, right? Like he just was not the same player. Brown also struggled, and that is an ode to Grimes in part, but yeah, we'll see. I like Grimes as a point of attack defender. I have questions about him guarding up bigger guys, but we'll see how that plays out. And ideally the Lakers add another starting level guy. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. Is there a world where LD don't want PJ at 20 better than JK at 20? I'm glad you mentioned this, because it's something I've been thinking about, is that like sometimes things we don't say or we don't know the full context of a situation, right? So maybe Luka does feel that way, and you know, people are like, oh, well, they had the success, and like that automatically means Luka wants him back, but like that's not always how. And I, to be 100% clear, like have not heard that. I have not gotten any inkling of that. That's been more so just me speculating and analyzing the situation. It's like, in theory, like Luka would be the guy pushing for PJ the most, right? And he's like, hey, he was the starter on this team, I want him back. And maybe he is doing that. I've not heard whether he is or isn't, but if the Lakers aren't really interested in him or aren't really pushing for it, that could be an element. And it doesn't even mean he doesn't want him. He could just kind of be indifferent or like neutral on it, and maybe because of that, they don't pursue it. I would say there's risk for both guys. PJ, I think there's like the shooting risk, there's the injury risk. JK, there's also some injury risk, but I think more so just role acceptance and how he slots in. But you could argue, especially if JK is on a 3-year deal versus PJ on a 4-year deal, it's a lower number. Like JK at 3 years, 45 versus PJ at 4 years, 88. You could talk me into JK, I guess, at that price. But to me, the biggest thing is like, I think PJ would come in and thrive off of Luka and Austin. He would accept the role. He's not going to try to be someone he's not. And that's just not a guarantee with JK. It's a possibility with JK, but it's not a guarantee. Tony, I'm not quite sure what this is in reference to. It says myopic, really Buha, last 5 years, the same. Not sure what. I don't think I used the word myopic today, or at least on this stream. Andre, thank you for the super chat. Dump Jake, Vando, Hardy, how much can we offer Watson? The Lakers are not going to be a cap space team, so the Lakers cannot even if they dumped all those guys, they would not be under the cap. So, Lakers can only do a Watson situation via sign and trade. West Coast made, thanks for the super chat. Chance Watson takes qualifying offer and takes MLE next year for LA. I would say low. I think if he takes the qualifying offer, there's going to be some tension in Denver where from both sides there's going to be some animosity. Like I think if he signs long term, he's probably the starter. If he doesn't sign long term, I wonder if they just keep him in a bench role and it's like, yo, like you're not part of our future, so we're like you'll be our sixth man, but you're not a starter. Like I'd be curious to see how that plays out. I think MLE is below Watson's value, and I think his market is being driven down by the fact that he's a restricted free agent right now. It's not like you can't tell me he's not a better player than Tari Eason, and seeing what Tari Eason got, I've actually thought that was like a team friendly deal, but that's still above the MLE. I think Watson is going to have offers at least in like the $20 million range next season if he's in unrestricted, but I guess technically like it's possible. And he is an LA guy. He does have the UCLA ties, and maybe he's willing to take that, but I think that's below his market and below what he could get next summer. Rip Van Winkle, thank you for the super chat. Expectations for AR, all-star or bust barring injury. Yeah, I mean, I would say the West is so deep that if you just go, like if we quickly go through the West, making the 12 is hard, especially if, let's look at this. Like I think he was going to make it last year if he stayed healthy and had the numbers too, but OKC is going to get two guys. OKC and San Antonio are each getting two, if not potentially one of those guys getting three, but let's say two at a minimum. So that's four. Denver will get Jokic, and that's to say nothing of Murray. Lakers will get Luka. That's six. Houston probably gets one. Minnesota gets at least one. That's eight. And that's before we mention, does Portland get a player? Does Phoenix get a player? Clippers, I'll say probably not. Warriors will get Steph. That's nine. And this is assuming health. Obviously, we can't predict if guys are going to be healthy, but like that's nine at a minimum. Pelicans, Cooper Flag might be in the mix now for a 10th spot. And then everyone else, maybe I think the Jazz will be much better. Maybe they get someone and that's like 10, but you're talking about him fighting for like one of the final 2 or 3 spots with like Jamal Murray, LaMelo Ball, potentially a second Rocket, Denny, Devin Booker, maybe a second Warriors player, depending on if they make a bigger move. So like, I think he should be in the mix. I don't know. I wouldn't say his season is a bust if he's on All-Star, but what I would want is like Austin is a clear top 15 or 16 player in the West. He's in the conversation. And if he somehow doesn't make it, it's like he was a snub. He was a guy that people are advocating like Austin should have been on the team, but he didn't quite make it. So I think that's probably my like baseline. It would be great if he made it. And obviously with the new contract, new expectations, like I think he's got to be in that conversation firmly, right? So maybe we're discussing semantics here, but I would say from like a numbers perspective, I think Austin's got to be 24, 25 plus points per game, 5 plus rebounds per game, 6.5, 7 plus assists per game with his typical efficiency of 50-ish% from the floor, mid to high 30s from three, and mid to high 80s at the free throw line, and then continuing to keep or working on keeping the turnovers down. If he gives you that, then I think that's living up to that contract. So I would say all-star conversation, but not like the long list of like 25 players for all-star, and he's like at the back end of that. Like legitimately, he's in that conversation for spots like 10 through 12. Because I do think if we're being realistic and honest, there's going to be 8 to 9 guys that are basically locked in. Can Austin be in that final third or fourth of the roster? I think yes, but obviously we'll see next season. But I would say this. I don't like being so binary with some of these things, but I would say if Austin never makes an all-star team on this contract, I do think that would be disappointing. Like based on the money that they're paying him and like effectively to be the number 2 guy on this team, at least with the current construction, they like that's all-star level money. So I would say if he goes to 4 years with the deal, never making an all-star team, that would be, in my opinion, disappointing. BT Kingsley, thank you for super chat. Vando D is best chaotic. JJ needs you to stay in scheme. That's a really good point here with all this. I think now I do wonder if they switch to a more drop scheme that will play into Vando's strengths better defensively. But if it's still the switching, like you're just going to switch Vando off the primary guy. And I think we've seen that time and time again. I also think JJ doesn't like guys who gamble too much. And that's also something for Adu here, where Adu's got to be careful with how much he gambles. Dustin, thank you for the super chat. Do not see a question here. And then final couple ones from Shabugan. Thank you for the super chat. 1,000+ watching after 2 hours of uptime. Congrats on what you built, mate. I'm glad that it's working out. Thank you. I appreciate it. Like the channel has been on fire the last few weeks, and it is humbling. It means the world to me. Like the audience has been amazing. And just a quick reminder for those watching, if you've not yet hit that subscribe button, it would mean a ton to me if you would consider doing so. But yeah, man, this has been a super fun time of the year. Again, the last like 3 or so weeks have just been incredible in terms of the consistent audience and the watch time over 2+ hours. So it's been really fun. Is he a real one? Veda Real MC. Think of a super chat. Would you prefer JK over Lou Dort? Yes, I would. I'm not, again, not the biggest Lou Dort guy. I think he's just really limited offensively. Nick Carney, thank you for the super chat. Looney's a good locker room guy, but we know what is coming in terms of his rotation spot. We need to find a young diamond in the rough. Any options come to mind? Wanted us to get Cardwell last year. Well, you are clairvoyant because Cardwell was a steal last year. I would say not like any, like I think the Lakers have several things they're juggling. They're trying to get that starter, but then if they don't, they're potentially making a move to just either clear a space or potentially even add like another wing or forward or something, but they could also go in a different direction, add a big. Cisse has been the one guy I've really wanted among the guys out there, but otherwise it's Nick Richards. And then, if we're looking specifically at free agency, there are some guys in the G League, maybe some guys back at, Jericho Sims, whatever, the back end roster level, but not really a guy that jumps out to mind. That's why I think it's probably going to be Mamu plus an athletic 4, and that potentially being a do. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. How long before we have a first to trade reset Stepien? So the Lakers, I believe, draft 2028 would be. So it depends. Their 2027 pick is top 4 protected. So if it's top 4, which I highly doubt, they will get a top 4 pick. Something would have to go seriously wrong this season. It will be gone, so they won't be able to trade 2027. And because they traded 2033, they wouldn't be able to trade 2034 yet. So I'm pretty sure draft day 2028 is the first time they'll be able to trade. They could trade that 2028 pick. Remember, it's a pick swap. And then they'd also have access to 2035 after the draft, which they could trade. So that's the point I've been trying to make recently of like the Lakers do get they have access to more picks than people are letting on, but it is, we're talking like 2 years from now, basically, until they could trade their next first. So that is a while. Tune Spade, thank you for the super chat. Aggregators, Luka may not want PJ Washington in LA. I'm used to it. I'm used to it at this point. I just sometimes got to go out and correct it. And Lego Team Builder, these are the first couple that came in. Jovan, don't listen to the haters. And Ginger Cat Jovan getting clipped out of context again. Yeah, there's some fun aggregation stuff that happened today that, I'm used to it. Muvsy, thank you for the super chat. Shout out to Muvsy, part of the Lakers collective team. 3-hour-long streams, killing it. Appreciate you, Muvsy. And then final one we got 2 more. Final one, or second to last one, penultimate one from Shabugan. Thank you for the super chat. Might be slightly dirty, but would the Lakers ask for a first for Bronny? I think that's a bit much. I think you probably ask for a second and maybe a second and a player you think would fit with the roster, like a minimum level player that would fit with the roster. Cause obviously salary wise, you got to just be careful. You could take back more, but it just, I'm trying to keep it like within a realistic framework. I mean, they could ask for it. I don't think they're going to get a first for him, but maybe if that's like really contingent on landing LeBron, maybe. Laker Boya, thank you for the super chat. Do you expect Kessler to be an all-star this year? I don't, but I expect, I projected out his numbers. I think are going to be roughly 16 points per game, 12 and a half rebounds and 2.5 blocks. So I think those would be career best marks across, pretty much across the board, elite numbers. And it's just really tough for a big to make the all-star game unless they're scoring at a certain level. Or back in the day, maybe some of the like Ben Wallace, the Kembe Mutombo guys who were the perennial defensive player of the year types. And Kessler will be in that mix. But I think if you look in the West, we already went through it, but like Chet's going to make it, probably Wemby's going to make it, Jokic is going to make it, Şengün might make it. I would put him ahead of Gobert for what that's worth. Like those might be the only bigs I would put ahead of him. Depending on how you classify Lauri Markkanen, maybe he's ahead of him. Denny is somewhere between a 3 and a 4, but I think he could be in the mix as well. Like he's probably someone I would see being more in that, I talked about maybe like there's like a list of 25 guys for the 12 spots. He might be somewhere in that like 20 to 25 spot, but Austin, I think is more the guy that's either going to make the roster or be like one of the final cuts. I just think it's typically difficult for a big man unless you got to be typically averaging like 18, 20 points per game. And I don't know if Kessler's quite there offensively yet, but we'll see. Then Chop 303, thank you for the super chat. What's the net rating with Kuminga on B-Ball Index? Good question. I had not done the Kuminga one yet. So let's pull that up here. 1 second. I'll walk you guys through this. With me. Here we go. So this is the default one. It starts with the Knicks. So we go Luka. We go Austin. We go Grimes. We go Kuminga. And I guess and then we go Kessler. And then we change Kessler to last year. 12.3. So that would be the second best mark behind Mamu. That would be better than Jake. And Kuminga slots in as a shot creator. So that's where like some of the fit here with having 3 shot creators. You ideally, 2 is kind of pushing it. 3, I think that's where you get into some of the issues the Lakers had last year in terms of having too many chefs in the kitchen from a usage perspective. And then defensively, he's a helper. So you would like to see that either be point of attack or wing. But I think they'd have to use him as wing stopper with the current group. But it's a 120.7 offensive rating, which is great. 108.4 defensive rating. So again, if we look at some of the ones like Jake, better offensively, worse defensively. Mamu, similar offensive. Actually, it's basically the same offensively, better defensively, slightly. This was Zaire, worse on both ends of the floor. Defense is close. This was Vando. This was interestingly slightly better offensively, but worse defensively by several points. And then Adu worse on both ends as well. So, yeah, I mean, the Kuminga one technically rates out a little bit worse than the Mamu one, but I just think he makes a ton more sense in that spot than Mamu does. And the defensive versatility there, being the wing stopper, that would make a ton of sense. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. Imagine me arguing with fans after all these questions, LOL. It's fun. I enjoy what I do, so I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't love it. Tom, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, you're a laser. Love the channel. Cheering for you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you. And I appreciate all of you watching. And then final one from friend of the show, Ryan Lucas, says, what about Kuzma and Sims trade if no JK, Kuz is CAA? I think that's something that people have suggested that. I think the one pushback I had with the Kuzma potential trades, I think someone was like, we'll throw in the 3 seconds and the swap. I think that is an overpay. Like, I think you've got to be at a certain level. And like, I would rather have JK than Kuz. Kuz to me has not quite been the same player the last few years, but as an expiring contract, he does have the familiarity with the Lakers, even if he doesn't necessarily have it with this particular group, because the group is basically gone from the championship team, the coaching staff, etc. He'd be returning to a familiar situation, but not necessarily a familiar locker room. But Kuzma and Sims, yeah, I mean, I would rather have PJ than this, but it does check the boxes of another. Now, I think with Kuzma, it would just have to be like, how does he, he's not shot the ball the same recently. I think he also has some role stuff where like, how does he view himself and his role within the pecking order? That would be its own conversation. But I would like, if ultimately the cost is like the Dalton Connect, Jaden Hardy spot or spots, from a talent perspective, you undeniably get better with Kuzma and Sims. So I would do that. I would not view him as a long-term solution. So I probably wouldn't even be thinking about signing him next summer. It'd be more of like a placeholder thing. And then I really would be hesitant to give up, maybe a second, 2 at the most. I don't think I would do more than like 2 seconds. That is where I tap out. So if they want to facilitate it and get off some money to the Lakers, cool. But I would not give up, I would definitely not give up the swap. And I don't think I wouldn't even want to give up 2 seconds, but like that's maybe the most I would give up because you're also getting Sims. I would definitely not give up 3 seconds. I would not give up the swap. So I'd be a little hesitant there with that. But the agency stuff does matter. But with all that said, appreciate you guys for rocking with me. As a reminder, for those 40% of you who watch consistently and have not yet subscribed, it would mean the world to me if you consider doing so. It takes a second to just hit that subscribe button. But I will be back definitely by Friday, potentially tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow with Lakers Collective, but likely later in the evening at some point, I will be on Lockdown Lakers with Andy Kamenetsky. So that'll be a fun conversation to look out for. But, I'll probably be back tomorrow, realistically. And then, of course, we're still on LeBron decision watch. We're on Kuminga watch. We're on all the watches until the offseason is resolved. But shout out to the chat. Shout out to the late night gang. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back later in the week. I'll talk to you all then.